Chapter 2390. Just like that, a man and a snake fought in the air. Although it was a fight, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the green python was not a match for the man in green. Blood spilled everywhere, dyeing the surrounding clouds red. From the sky to the ground, and back again, the battle soon came to an end. The green snake's body was badly mutilated, and a part of her tail was broken. She was lying on the ground powerlessly, and it was difficult for her to even raise her head. At this time, she had already reached her limit. Ji Yunhuang mercilessly raised his sword, preparing to slash down. At this time, Tian Xueqing, who was standing at the side, suddenly said, "Wait." Ji Yunhuang was stunned. The green snake took the opportunity to desperately escape, but before she could get far, she was caught by Ji Yunhuang with the demon binding rope. The green snake was tied up by the demon binding rope, lying on the ground motionlessly. She hatefully said, "What do you want to do?" Tian Xueqing sat on the cloud far away and calmly said, "Where is the original Mizukage?" Mizukage was the name of the little maid. The golden snake seemed to be stunned for a moment, and suddenly laughed, "I am the Mizukage. I became his slave in order to kill him." Tian Xueqing was still indifferent. "You are not. Yesterday, before I left, you were the real Mizukage. Now, you just changed into her appearance. Where is the real Mizukage?" The green snake looked up to the sky and hissed. A green light flashed on her body, and a woman in green clothes sat there covered in blood. Her eyebrows were enchanting, and the mole at the corner of her eye added a bit of innocence to her. She laughed, and blood spurted out. "That bitch has already been eaten by me. Now, even if you cut open my stomach, you won't be able to find her. Ha 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 ha, she has already melted. Ha 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 ha." She laughed crazily, but tears kept flowing out. Tian Xueqing's eyes turned cold, and she no longer spoke. The green snake seemed to know that she was about to die. She laughed and said sarcastically, "You humans are the best at disguising, the best at disguising. I have seen through you, ha ha ha. In your eyes, it doesn't matter if humans do anything wrong to demons, but if demons want revenge, you don't ask for the reason. You use the banner of justice to kill us, and you still think that you represent justice. Ha 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 ha. It's unfair. The heavens are unfair." The sword in Ji Yunhuang's hand paused for a moment. Green Snake cried out mournfully, "Make your move. Aren't you enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens? Do it." Ji Yunhuang moved his sword away and said indifferently, "I'll give you a chance to complain about your grievances." Green Snake was stunned and did not speak for a long time. After an unknown period of time, she said faintly, "Actually, I cultivated the immortal Tao in the beginning." Ji Yunhuang remained silent. From just now, he felt that this snake demon seemed to have a faint immortal aura. This was also why he decided to believe this snake this time. Green Snake looked at the white clouds floating in the distance. The light in her eyes grew dimmer and dimmer. There was an indescribable tiredness in her voice. "I met him when he was seriously injured when I came down from the mountain. I saw that he was pitiful, so I saved him. Thus began an ill-fated relationship. After he woke up, he grabbed my hand and said that he fell in love with me at first sight and wanted to marry me. Of course, I refused and ran back to the forest in fear. But I didn't expect him to follow me. I didn't allow him to enter the mountain, so he waited at the foot of the mountain for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, he fainted at the entrance of the valley." Chapter 2391. The green snake continued, "I lived in the mountains and forests. Once, I went out alone and met a wild wolf. He came out of nowhere and stood in front of me stupidly, saying that he would not allow the pack of wild wolves to hurt me. He definitely did not know that it was a piece of cake for me to deal with that pack of wolves. He was severely injured and I stayed behind to treat his wounds. Those days were really good. He almost spoiled me to the heavens. Even if I wanted the moon in the sky, he would pluck it for me. He named me Enu because he liked the way I looked when I danced in a silver dress. Enu was a snake and did not care much about status. He treated her well, so she used all her love to reciprocate his kindness. Physical intimacy was a natural thing. When I was pregnant, he married me, but in the name of a concubine. He said that his mother did not agree to take me as his first wife, so he could only wrong me for a while. However, he would only love me forever and never marry anyone else. I did not care about status, I just wanted to be with him. Later, he changed, everything changed. He married his first wife. He said that this was his mother's dying wish and that he could not be unfilial, so I agreed. On the night of their wedding night, I was next door and I clearly heard him tell that woman that he only loved her. I made a scene, but he slapped me. Then, he applied medicine for me with heartache and said that he and that woman were just putting on a show, each taking what he needed. I believed him. Enu laughed sarcastically, no matter what he said, would believe him. It is not that I do not know some things, but I am afraid to think about them. What happened after that? Why did you degenerate into a demon? Tian Xueqing asked. He was destined to face a calamity of death when he was 20 years old. I changed my fate against the heavens and degenerated into a demon. Enu explained calmly, but Tian Xueqing could feel how dangerous that moment was. Changing one's fate against the heavens, the slightest mistake would have caused one's soul to dissipate. After I woke up, he treated me even better. I was also very satisfied with the birth of the child. Tian Xueqing suddenly had a strong intuition that something must have happened on the day Enu was born. The child was born, and it was a human boy. I was so happy, but when I showed him, I found that his face was gloomy. Enu's big black and white eyes gradually became red, and her voice was full of strong hatred. After he held the child, he gave the child to that bitch Mizukich, and that bitch threw the child on the ground in front of me. My child. He had just been born and hadn't even opened his eyes to take a good look at the world before he was ordered to fall to his death by his father. How could he be so ruthless? How could he be so ruthless? The child was a human. He's innocent. Silver Feather's voice became more and more mournful, like a cuckoo, crying blood. He already knew that I was the snake immortal, he already knew. The day our snake immortal gave birth was when she was at her weakest. He specifically chose that moment to attack me. He stabbed me in the heart with a knife and dug out my inner core. He directly ate it. Ha 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 ha, he's good to me, it's all for my inner core. Everything was an act. Ha ha ha, everything was a disguise. It's all my wishful thinking. Ha 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 ha. Tian Xueqing felt her heart tighten, as if it was tightly clenched by a big hand. Looking at the crazy Enu, a trace of pity flashed through her eyes. He wanted immortality so much that he went crazy. At that time, I was simply delivering myself to his doorstep. Chapter 2392. He was so obsessed with immortality that he almost lost his mind. At that time, I was practically delivering myself to his doorstep. However, no matter how much he thought about it, he forgot that I had fallen to become a demon. My immortal core had turned into a demon core, and the demon core was extremely poisonous. Even if he swapped my blood with his when he changed his fate, it only delayed the effects of the poison. In less than 2 hours, he would have died from the poison. Enu chuckled as if she was a child who had taken advantage of someone else. She laughed until her face was full of tears, but she did not realize it. When she was done laughing, she said slowly, however, I never thought that you would be able to cure him. In less than 2 hours, the poison in his body was suppressed, Tian Shuiqing did not speak. Treating people was her duty as a doctor. However, she did not expect that she would save such a crazy person. My child is dead, and my inner core has been dug out. Why are they still alive? Why? I can't accept this. I can't accept this. Tears of blood flowed down Silverfeather's face. She said unconsciously, but I was too injured. I couldn't do anything to them. I could only watch him get better day by day. He was flirting with that bitch who killed my child. Yesterday, I barely recovered from my injuries, so I came to take revenge. I tore that bitch apart and used the snake's soul to slowly erode him, making him suffer a fate worse than death. In the end, he became my puppet. Do you know that he was tortured for a day and a night? Ha ha ha, I took revenge for my son. Yu was crying and laughing at the same time. She told the whole story incoherently. I didn't expect that after he was controlled, he still had a trace of consciousness left. He pulled the bell with all his might. I wanted to kill him immediately, but after thinking about it, I decided to kill him all at once. It turned out that the person who pulled the bell was not a servant girl, but young Master Su, who was on the verge of losing his consciousness. Telling this story seemed to have used up all of Yu's energy. She weakly fell to the ground, her breath weak. Actually, I was going to die anyway. Without the inner core. Previously, revenge kept me alive, but now I've taken my revenge. I can rest in peace. My child. Yu slowly closed her eyes, a drop of blood slowly flowed down her cheeks. Tian Shuiqing sat on the ground, feeling cold all over. She lived deep in the mountains and was young. Although she had treated countless people, she had never been involved in worldly affairs. She didn't expect there to be such a tragic story in the human world. When he first heard this, the shock in his heart could be imagined. Ji Yunhuang's face was also pale. He seemed to have been touched by something as he clenched his fists tightly. Tian Shuiqing's experience was similar to Yu's, but he was not as bad as young Master Su. This man is too despicable. How could he bear to treat a woman who treated him so well like this? If I had known earlier, I would have let him die from the poison. Even if he dies 10,000 times, it won't be too much. Tian Shuiqing's tone was filled with hatred. Ji Yunhuang's face turned even paler. He paused for a moment before saying, "Ah Qing, if this young Master Su didn't intentionally use this Yu, but he did use her to marry her. After that, he treated other women well and often treated Yu badly. In the end, he caused Yu's tragic death. Do you think that Yu would forgive young Master Su if she was reborn?" His analogy could be said to be evasive. Tian Shuiqing's heart was filled with anger, so she did not really understand the meaning behind Ji Yunhuang's words. Chapter 2393. His analogy could be said to be evasive. Tian Shuiqing was filled with anger and did not really understand the meaning behind Ji Yunhuang's words. She replied without hesitation, "Of course not. If I were Yu, I would stay far away from him after being reborn. It would be best if we never met again." Ji Yunhuang, after Tian Shuiqing finished speaking, she inadvertently raised her head and saw that Ji Yunhuang's expression was not right. She was a little surprised. "What happened to you?" Ji Yunhuang suddenly woke up. Looking at her clear eyes, he did not know what to feel. He slightly shook his head. "I'm fine. I probably used too much strength during the fight just now." Tian Shuiqing was finally relieved. Looking at Yu on the ground, she asked, "Is she dead?" Ji Yunhuang softly replied, "Yes." Seeing that Tian Shuiqing was still staring blankly at Yu's corpse, he slightly frowned. With a flick of his finger, a ball of fire flew towards Yu's corpse. With a bang, it started burning. As the fire burned, Inu's face was peaceful, as if she was in a deep sleep. However, Tian Shuiqing knew that this enchanting, pure and innocent snake immortal had already died with wounds all over her body. Whether it was her body or her heart, she was completely dead. Inu's silver-white clothes fluttered in the fire like a butterfly, beautifully dancing in the fire. A blood-red spirit slowly rose from Inu's corpse. A resentful spirit. A resentful spirit with strong resentment. It was a spirit that could not be purified and could only be scattered. Ji Yunhuang's hand silently bent. Tian Shuiqing closed her eyes and muttered something. She slightly raised one of her hands and a faint white light was emitted from her soft and fair fingertips, shining on the crimson resentful spirit. The moment the white light enveloped it, the crimson resentful spirit struggled and screamed. Then, it suddenly stopped struggling and looked at the gentle white light in confusion. Being enveloped by the white light, the expected pain did not come. Instead, it felt endless sleep and peace. The color of its body started to fade little by little. Ji Yunhuang looked at Tian Shuiqing and a hint of surprise flashed across his eyes. She could actually purify spirits. Tian Shuiqing's forehead was slightly sweaty and her brows were slightly wrinkled. She could not hold on any longer. Seeing this, Ji Yunhuang flicked his finger and a ball of golden light enveloped Tian Shuiqing. Tian Shuiqing's brows gradually softened. Under the white light, the vengeful spirit slowly faded and became a pure white soul. Tian Shuiqing waved her hand lightly, and the pure white soul flew over hesitantly, landing in Tian Shuiqing's palm. An ethereal and slightly naive voice sounded, "Thank you." After a pause, it added, "I'm sorry." She had once wanted to kill Tian Shuiqing, but she did not expect Tian Shuiqing to repay her evil with kindness and release her from purgatory. Tian Shuiqing raised her hand and said, "Go. I hope you can meet the right person in your next life." The pure white soul slowly flew into the air and became fainter and fainter. Just as it was about to fade into a shadow, it turned back and suddenly said, "Cherish the person in front of you." It was unknown who it was talking to. After saying this, she completely disappeared from the world. Ji Yunhuang carried Tian Shuiqing and flew back to her quiet spiritual courtyard. As for young Master Su's life and death, without Tian Shuiqing's help, he would die in extreme pain within 2 hours. Tian Shuiqing was also straightforward. The moment she landed, she immediately broke free from Ji Yunhuang's embrace and ordered, "Throw that young Master Su out." Chapter 2394. Ji Yunhuang rubbed his brows. "I'll throw him away later. Don't let him bite anyone. He would deal with that person cleanly and guarantee that he would not cause any trouble for Qing." Tian Shuiqing thought about it and was about to say something when she suddenly saw Fen Shui running over. Tian Shuiqing looked at the flustered Fen Shui and frowned. "Fen Shui, what's wrong? Why are you running?" Fen Shui gasped for breath and lowered her head. After a long time, she finally said, Master is back." Tian Shuiqing's eyes lit up and her voice was filled with unconcealable joy. "What did you say?" "Master is back." "Where is he now?" Ji Yunhuang stood at the side and his eyes slightly darkened. He had been with Tian Shuiqing for so long, but he had never seen her so excited. Fen Shui finally gasped for breath and raised her head. Her face was filled with nervousness and helplessness. She looked at Tian Shuiqing as if she was looking at a life-saving straw. "Master is back, but he was poisoned. He was sent up by someone." Master was poisoned. Tian Shuiqing felt as if she was suddenly struck by lightning and her body went soft. She anxiously said, Quickly bring me there." Fen Shui stumbled in front and Ji Yunhuang suddenly asked, "Where is your master now?" Fen Shui was stunned and subconsciously replied, "Master is at his usual place in the recuperation park. in the southeast corner in front. Before she could finish her words, Ji Yunhuang carried Tian Shueqing and flew towards the southeast. Feng Shui, Ji Yunhuang could feel that Tian Shueqing's body was slightly stiff and her hands and feet were slightly cold. Her eyes carried a trace of panic. He softly comforted her, "Don't worry, have more confidence in your medical skills." He had never seen Tian Shueqing so flustered, as if she had lost her backbone. Tian Shueqing's small face was pale. "My master has a physique that is immune to poison. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have been poisoned. If he was poisoned, it could only be one of the three great poisons." Ji Yunhuang's heart sank. The three great poisons still had no cure. As soon as the two of them entered the house, they smelled a cold fragrance. A man in white was sitting on the bed. He had a handsome face, and his temperament was as gentle as jade. His white clothes were of the most simple style, without any embellishments, but it made him look like a banished immortal. That person's lips were pale, and he looked a little weak as he leaned against the bed. When he saw Tian Shueqing running in, warmth flashed across his eyes. Although his voice was a little weak, it was still as warm as the spring breeze. "Shueqing, master is back." After Tian Shueqing saw her weak master, there was no one else in her eyes. She plunged into Ji Mo's arms and buried her head in his chest. She said in a muffled voice, "Master, you're finally back." As she spoke, she pressed her small head against Ji Mo's chest and closed her eyes to count his heartbeat. Then, she used her mind to check his pulse. GMO didn't stop her and let her lie on his body to feel his pulse. When Tian Shueqing raised her head, he asked with a smile, "Shueqing, have you found out what kind of poison is in master?" His tone was indifferent, as if he didn't take the matter of him being poisoned to heart. He even wanted to test Tian Shueqing. Tian Shueqing's small face was pale and her hands were trembling. But looking at her calm master, she also slowly calmed down. She briefly and rationally analyzed the results of her pulse to her master and finally concluded, "Master, you've been poisoned by the ice soul poison." Chapter 2395. The ice soul poison was one of the three great poisons. The poisoned person would gradually stiffen within 10 days. Even if it was summer, it would be of no help. From the skin to the inside, inch by inch, the person would be frozen to death even in summer. GMO patted her head and smiled faintly, "That's right. It's ice soul poison." Tian Shueqing grabbed GMO's sleeve with hope, "Master, do you have a way to detoxify it?" GMO muttered to himself for a moment and then slowly said, "When I was first poisoned, I didn't have a way to detoxify it. I could only slowly search for a way. I finally found a way, but it can only delay the onset of the poison. I can't completely detoxify it. Therefore, I came back this time to see if Shueqing has any good ideas." Tian Shueqing looked at her master with wide eyes. Even her master has no way. She desperately searched her mind, trying to find a good way to save her master. However, how could she find one in such a short time? She anxiously paced around the room. Because she was too anxious, sweat appeared on her forehead. "Shueqing, I've taught you before that as a doctor, you must not be impatient. The more serious the illness, the more you must be calm. Calm down and think slowly," GMO said in a deep voice. Tian Shueqing's heart trembled. She looked at her master and GMO nodded slightly at her. She slightly closed her eyes and tried to calm down the chaotic emotions in her heart. After thinking for a moment, she secretly sighed, "Disciple still doesn't have a specific method." "Master, why don't you tell Disciple how you suppress the poison? From this perspective, I might be able to come up with a new idea." GMO nodded and began to tell Tian Shueqing his method of suppressing the poison. Tian Shueqing sat at the side and listened seriously. Occasionally, she would ask a question or two. GMO patiently answered her questions, a master and a disciple. One asked and one answered. The two of them got along very well. When Tian Shueching threw herself into GMO's arms, GMO did not have any reaction. It was obvious that he was used to it. The two of them had a very close relationship. There was almost no room for a third person to come in between them. Ji Yunhuang had been standing there the whole time. He was usually the center of attention, but now, he was like a shadow in the background. No one noticed his existence. That little girl's entire heart was filled with thoughts of her master. Ever since she entered this room, she hadn't even glanced at him once. Perhaps she had already forgotten about his existence? His face was slightly pale, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. He looked straight at the two people who were gathered together to discuss medicine. The two people were so intimate as if there was no one else around, and he felt that he was a little unnecessary. After all, he had been through a lot. From Tian Shueching's interaction with GMO, he could tell that Tian Shueching had feelings for GMO. He felt as if he had stepped into icy water, and his entire body was cold. When GMO raised his eyes, he inadvertently swept his gaze over the person standing in the shadows. He took a closer look and found that the figure was somewhat unfamiliar. His face was hidden in the darkness, and although he was wearing the clothes of a servant, there was still a natural air about him. GMO searched his mind for a long time, and once again confirmed that there was no such servant on his tranquil mountain. It wasn't that GMO had a good memory, but rather that it was hard to forget someone like Ji Yunhuang after seeing him once. GMO turned his head and asked, "You are?" Ji Yunhuang was in a daze, and for a moment, he didn't hear what this person said, so he didn't say anything. When he was quiet, he had a noble and cold aura. Chapter 2396. When he was calm, he had a noble and cold aura. He did not like to show his emotions, so at this moment, he looked somewhat cold, as if he disdained to answer GMO's question. Tian Shueching looked at him coldly. She did not want to see anyone disrespect her master. She faintly opened her mouth and said, "Master, he is a patient that I saved. Because he didn't have enough money on him." Speaking up to this point, she paused for a moment and looked at Ji Yunhuang before continuing, "So he stayed behind to help me repay the debt. Now, he is just a servant, so you don't need to pay attention to him." Ji Mo's eyes flashed with a trace of deep thought, but he did not say anything. Ji Yunhuang's face slightly changed. He might ignore other people's words, but he would never ignore Tian Shueching's. A servant was already, until now, he was just an unimportant servant in her heart. Previously, Tian Shueching treated him as her sky and carefully brought everything she had to him. However, he abandoned her like a worn-out shoe and trampled on her sincerity. Now, she abandoned him like a worn-out shoe. He slightly closed his eyes. Was the wheel of fortune turning? And all of this was his own doing, so he could not blame anyone else. According to his original temperament, he would have turned around and left after receiving such cold treatment, but now, even if everything in front of him was dazzling, he did not want to leave, as if his feet were nailed to the ground. At this moment, Tian Shueching's thoughts were all on her master, so she did not notice Ji Yunhuang's depressed mood. She took his pulse and poured water for him. She was very attentive and busy like a little bee. Ji Yunhuang just stood there and watched, motionless like a piece of wood. He thought back to the time when he was sick. At that time, Tian Shueching had just started following him. She didn't care if he was as cold as ice towards her. She would keep circling around him like this. He only had to look at her or say a few words to her, and her eyes would light up for an entire day. The past was gone with the smoke and could no longer be chased. That year, Tian Shueching also died on that plateau because of him. now that she had been reborn, she no longer had any memories of him. In her eyes, he was just a servant. His heart began to ache again, and there was a sour feeling in it. His face became even paler, and his gaze towards Tian Shuiqing became even deeper. Your servant doesn't seem to be feeling well. GMO finally noticed him. This servant's face was abnormally pale. A doctor has the heart of a parent. This sentence is most deeply reflected in GMO. He is injured like this, but he still has the heart to pay attention to others. Tian Shuiqing finally turned around and glanced at Ji Yunhuang. Are you not feeling well? Ji Yunhuang was stunned for a moment. He looked at her and nodded slightly. Subconsciously, he hoped that Tian Shuiqing would also circle around him, even if it meant that she would give him some of her attention. He thought that Tian Shuiqing would come over and check his pulse after he admitted that he was not feeling well. However, she just said, if you are not feeling well, go back and rest. I will give you half a day off today. After she finished speaking, she began to circle around her master again. Ji Yunhuang took a light breath and secretly adjusted his emotions. He smiled and said, it's fine. I can still hold on. He then looked at GMO and said, I wonder if I can take your pulse. GMO's gaze turned to him. Do you know medicine? Ji Yunhuang smiled. I know a little. Chapter 2397. He had a kind of aura, and this kind of aura made people feel an inexplicable desire to submit to him. GMO extended his wrist. Then I'll have to trouble you. Ji Yunhuang did not stand on ceremony. He sat in front of GMO's bed and immediately took his pulse. GMO looked at him and faintly felt that the person in front of him was not simple. GMO was different from Tian Shuiqing. Tian Shuiqing stayed in the Medicine Valley every day and only dealt with patients, so she was not in tune with the current situation. However, GMO had been wandering around for many years and naturally trained a pair of sharp eyes. After Ji Yunhuang finished taking his pulse, GMO asked, how is it? Ji Yunhuang's eyes were calm. You are not suffering from the same poison. GMO's expression changed. He was indeed suffering from two types of poison. However, the ice soul poison was the most overbearing and the most fatal one. Although the other poison was not easy to cure, it was not fatal. Therefore, he did not care about it for the time being. He nodded in acknowledgement. Ji Yunhuang said, originally, the hallucinatory flower poison in your body was not fatal. However, once it combined with the ice soul poison, it would produce another type of poison. He spoke frankly with assurance. Even Tian Shuiqing, who was deep in thought, was attracted by his words. When GMO finished listening, he could not help but clap his hands. So you are also a medical grandmaster. I have neglected you. May I know your esteemed name? Ji Yunhuang only said 3 words. Ji Yunhuang. GMO's body trembled. Buddha Lotus Mountain Second Master, Ji Yunhuang. I am ashamed. Ji Yunhuang did not deny it. GMO was stunned for a moment. You have already cultivated an immortal body. What kind of injury did you suffer that my disciple could treat? I was careless and was injured by a cloud-swallowing beast. Fortunately, your disciple helped me. I also have to thank Teacher Ji for teaching such a good disciple. GMO looked at Ji Yunhuang with a complicated gaze. The current second master of Buddha Lotus Mountain owed someone money. Would he sell his body for a mere 1,000 taels of silver? He was the richest person in the world, okay? Tian Shuiqing might not know, but GMO knew that the current monarch of Changkong country was trying his best to curry favor with his imperial uncle. He was thinking of ways to invite him back to be the state preceptor. He gave Ji Yunhuang all kinds of treasures. It could be said that as long as he crooked his finger, countless taels of silver would automatically run into his pocket. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was as rich as a country. Such a person would cause a sensation no matter where he went, but now he was serving as a servant in this small valley. What was his purpose? Some people didn't look like an emperor even when they wore a dragon robe, but this person looked like an emperor even when he wore a servant's outfit. GMO really wanted to chat more with Ji Yunhuang, but he had been poisoned too deeply. His mind was in a bad state, and after talking for a while, he felt dizzy. Although GMO had managed to slow down the effects of the poison, the ice soul poison was slowly eroding his body. The only reason he had been able to hold on until now was because of his last breath. Now, he finally couldn't hold on any longer. He slumped onto the bed, white frost forming on his forehead. Tian Xueqing jumped in fright and touched her master's forehead. She called out to her master twice, but she didn't get any response. She panicked and couldn't help but shout angrily at Ji Yunhuang, "My master is already so weak, why are you chatting with him so much?" She pushed Ji Yunhuang away and busied herself around her master. Ji Yunhuang was pushed back a step by her, and his expression changed slightly. He pursed his lips and looked at Tian Xueqing, who was busying herself around GMO. He said in a deep voice, "I have a way to alleviate the effects of the poison. Let me try." Tian Xueqing was so anxious that her forehead was covered in sweat. When she heard his words, she asked, "What? What way?" Chapter 2398. Ji Yunhuang did not beat around the bush. "Cooperate with me." He began to quickly explain the precautions. Tian Xueqing's expression changed slightly. This method was considered unconventional in the medical field. If it was not done properly, the patient's life would be lost. She looked at Ji Yunhuang suspiciously. She was still young and impatient, so she spoke rashly. "This method won't work, right? If it fails, my master's life will be gone. It might not matter to you, but to me, my master." She was interrupted by Ji Yunhuang before she could finish her sentence. "If anything happens to your master because of this, I will pay with my life." Tian Xueqing was speechless. Ji Yunhuang pursed his lips and looked at her with a sharp gaze. "Do you believe me now?" Tian Xueqing's heart skipped a beat. She looked at her master. Ji Mo's complexion was getting worse and worse. His limbs and torso were covered in thin ice. She had already found a way to treat her master's poison, but she needed time. She still needed a whole day. "How long can your method delay my master's death?" 2 days. "I can guarantee that he will be fine for 2 days." Tian Xueqing finally let out a sigh of relief. "All right, we will use your method." Ji Yunhuang did not say anything. He immediately began to work while Tian Xueqing cooperated with him. Both of them were experts and cooperated very well. After working for a while, they finally forced the poison to Ji Mo's arm and temporarily stopped the spread of the poison. Tian Xueqing slowly walked out of the preservation garden. Ji Yunhuang followed beside her without saying a word. After a while, he suddenly asked in a low voice, "Is your full name Xueqing?" Tian Xueqing's mind was filled with her master's illness. She subconsciously replied, "No, my full name is Tian Xueqing." Although he was already prepared, the moment he heard this name, Ji Yunhuang clenched his fists and his heart began to beat faster. "Who gave you this name?" Tian Xueqing looked at him as if she was surprised that he would ask such a question. However, she was not prepared to tell him the truth, so she changed the topic. She took out a blue stone from her bosom and shook it in her hand. "Young Master Ji, as far as I know, a small piece of blue warm stone is worth thousands of gold taels. As for such a large piece, I'm afraid it's priceless, right?" Ji Yunhuang was, after all, an old fox. From the moment she took out the blue stone, he knew that something was wrong. He immediately thought of an excuse. A friend lent it to me. I can't use it as collateral. Tian Xueqing said with a faint smile, since your friend is so generous, I'm sure he won't mind redeeming you. Ji Yunhuang sighed. It's a pity that he died young. This stone became the only thing he left with me. Tian Xueqing took another deep breath and said, You're still the second in command of the Buddha Lotus Mountain, the #1 sect in the world. Ji Yunhuang once again cut her off. No matter how big the sect is, I'm still clean. Tian Xueqing. So no matter what, he had no money. Ji Yunhuang opened his mouth and asked, Your relationship with your master, has it always been this good? Looking at the interaction between Tian Xueqing and GMO, he felt a strong sense of crisis. It must be known that a relationship between a master and a disciple could also develop into a romantic relationship. For example, his grandmaster Shenjiuli and Ning Xuema. Tian Xueqing nodded. It was my master who saved me. He even raised me up and taught me medicine. My master is the closest person to me in this world. Chapter 2399. Tian Xueqing nodded her head. It was master who saved me, raised me up, and taught me medicine. Master is the closest person to me in this world. As she said this, Tian Xueqing's eyes seemed to sparkle with starlight, and her eyes were astonishingly bright. Ji Yunhuang's heart sank. She used the word closest to her, not family. Looking at her bright eyes, his heart felt like it had been cut by a knife. She was so happy, but it was for another man. He took a light breath and said in a casual tone, A teacher for a day, a father for life. You are naturally his closest family. He will treat you like a father. Tian Xueqing's eyes dimmed and she said indifferently, Xueqing does not have parents, so I don't know the kindness of my parents. I only know that master is the person closest to me in this world. Even if I have to sacrifice my life, I will save him. If anything happens to him, I am afraid that I will not be able to live on. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. Tian Xueqing felt that the atmosphere around her was not right. She raised her head and saw Ji Yunhuang looking down at her. His gaze was extremely oppressive. His figure was tall and straight, and Tian Xueqing was not tall enough. She was suppressed by his invisible aura, causing her heart to palpitate. She subconsciously took a few steps back, creating a safe distance. She frowned slightly. What does this person want to do? His gaze is so strange. She was really on guard against him, and all of this was because he asked for it. She was still a child, so she did not know anything. Ji Yunhuang took a light breath and suppressed the tumultuous emotions in his heart. Don't be afraid, I can help you. You are too tired today, so go back and rest first. If you need any herbs, you can tell me and I will help you pick them. Although he did not like GMO, since GMO was the most important person to Tian Xueqing, he had to save him. Tian Xueqing was now even more wary of him. She shook her head and said, There is no need. These herbs are not easy to pick, and they can easily be mixed up with other herbs. I will do it myself. Ji Yunhuang's expression changed slightly. He looked at her and wanted to say something, but he could not. She did not believe him. Was she afraid that he would harm GMO? He did not say anything else and only said, Do as you wish. He turned and left. Tian Xueqing was taken aback for a moment before she subconsciously looked over. Ji Yunhuang's back was tall and straight. His robe fluttered in the wind, giving off a sense of bleakness. Tian Xueqing suddenly felt a stabbing pain in her heart. She moved her lips and took 2 steps towards him, as if she wanted to say something. But in the end, she lowered her eyes and turned away. Tian Shueching was currently climbing a mountain. She carried a small medicine basket on her back and slowly climbed up the mountain path. The mountain wind was chilly, causing her face to hurt. Oh. Her green dress fluttered in the wind, and she looked as if she would fly away with the wind at any moment. In front of them was a narrow mountain path, barely enough for one person to pass through. Below them was a 1,000-foot cliff. She was afraid of heights. Tian Shueching's face was slightly pale as she asked Wang Kai, "Are you sure that the Netherworld flower is not far ahead?" Wang Kai Piglet closed its eyes and sniffed carefully. Then, it nodded firmly. "Yes, Master. The smell of the Netherworld flower is very strong. I'm sure it's right in front. However, Master, the path ahead is very dangerous." Tian Shueching's footsteps paused for a moment before she slowly walked towards the small path. The longer the poison stays in her master's body, the greater the damage to her master's body. Chapter 2400. The longer the poison stayed in her master's body, the more damage it would cause to her master's body. Therefore, on the second day, she went up the mountain to pick herbs with Wang Kai Piglet by her side. She had to climb up the mountain as soon as possible to get the Netherworld flower. She moved bit by bit, not daring to look down. The cliff below was so deep that it made her dizzy. Tian Shueching walked on this path for less than 10 minutes, and her forehead was covered in cold sweat. The strong mountain wind blew, leaving behind a chill. The wind blew so hard that she almost couldn't stand still, and her body couldn't help but sway a few times. Wang Kai Piglet walked behind her and didn't even dare to breathe loudly, fearing that it would startle its master. The wind carried the unique fragrance of the Netherworld flower, which was faintly discernible and captivating. Tian Shueching's eyes lit up. She should be there soon. At this moment, her feet suddenly slipped, and she couldn't help but lean forward. Wang Kai Piglet screamed and saw Tian Shueching falling down like a kite with a broken string. Wang Kai Piglet suddenly jumped down, and its body suddenly changed rapidly, turning into a big pink pancake and quickly approaching Tian Shueching. The moment Tian Shueching landed on the ground, Wang Kai caught her and smashed her onto the ground with a bang. Tian Shueching was fine. Wang Kai Piglet's meat cushion was soft and thick. She felt as if she had fallen into a ball of jelly and didn't suffer any injuries. She sat up and heard Wang Kai groaning in pain under her body. She quickly jumped down to check on its injuries. Wang Kai returned to its piggy form and said weakly, "Master, I'm fine, but the Netherworld flower." It was about to say that it couldn't pick the Netherworld flower when it suddenly smelled a strange fragrance that was faintly discernible and almost gone with the wind. Wang Kai sneezed, ran forward a few steps, and sniffed again. Its drooping ears instantly stood up, and it said excitedly, "Master, Master. There seems to be a Netherworld flower in front." Tian Shueching's eyes lit up, and she followed Wang Kai Piglet in that direction. "We're here." Following Wang Kai's words, Tian Shueching came to a small open space. There wasn't a single blade of grass here, but there was a blue flower in the middle. It was the Netherworld flower that was emitting a cold yet soul-stirring scent. Tian Shueching's eyes lit up, but she wasn't in a hurry to pick them. Instead, she cautiously checked her surroundings. After confirming that there was no danger, she went forward. The Netherworld flower seemed to be flowing with light, and the entire flower had a dreamy color. The petals gently swayed in the wind, and a faint fragrance assaulted the senses. Everything was astonishingly beautiful, and it carried an indescribable aura of temptation. The closer Tian Shueching got to the flower, the tighter her heart became. She suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. Something was wrong. Something was wrong. Tian Shueching's heart was about to scream crazily. When she was an arm's length away from the flower, the intense uneasiness in her heart forced her to stop. Tian Shuiqing took a deep breath. She felt that there was something wrong with this flower. She paused for a moment, then turned around and left. The moment she turned around, the flower suddenly trembled, and a snake's head was faintly discernible. Then, the flower moved and revealed its original form, a small blue snake, the netherworld snake. This snake was petite, but its poison was the strongest in the world. If an ordinary person was bitten by it, they would die immediately. Chapter 2401. The little snake bit towards Tian Shuiqing's back like lightning. "Master, be careful behind you!" Wang Kai shouted and then knocked Tian Shuiqing away. The little snake bit Wang Kai's body. Tian Shuiqing was knocked away by Wang Kai and knelt on the ground. She ignored the pain in her waist and hurriedly turned around to look for Wang Kai. Wang Kai's pink body turned dark green at a speed visible to the naked eye. The little pig was twitching. It could be seen how strong the poison of the hell snake was. Tian Shuiqing's heart sank, and her mind went blank. She pulled out her hidden blade with a shua sound and stabbed at the little blue snake. Although Tian Shuiqing's martial arts were not strong, her calculation ability was extraordinary. Although the sword was hurried, she was not panicked. She had calculated the angle and was sure that she could stab that damn snake. However, she did not expect that the moment she stabbed it, the snake actually dodged with lightning speed and bit her wrist with great accuracy and viciousness. Tian Shuiqing was shocked and reflexively blocked with her hand. The snake bit the sword and the green venom flowed along the sword. Wherever the venom passed, the sword would be corroded. Tian Shuiqing's pupils shrank and she threw the sword and the snake away. Then she bent down and quickly picked up the little pig, turned around and ran away. While running, she patted the little pig in her arms. "Wang Kai. Wang Kai, wake up." She was very anxious. If Wang Kai's poison was not cured, it would be fatal. But she had no time to protect herself, so she did not have time to detoxify Wang Kai. Wang Kai groaned and slowly woke up. Its vision was very blurry and the venom had already entered its eyes. It said weakly, "Master, put me down. Wang Kai can't live anymore." Tian Shuiqing's heart ached and her nose was sour. Tears almost fell out, but she held it back and said with a fierce voice, "No. Even if I die, I won't put you down." She ran with all her strength and was panting, but she was still not as fast as the little snake. She sprinkled a handful of poisonous powder from her arms, but it did not have any effect. The little snake was not affected at all. The little snake grew bigger and bigger behind her. In the blink of an eye, the little snake grew to a few meters long and as thick as a thigh. The little pig's vision gradually darkened. Before it lost consciousness, it murmured, "Master, in the next life, Wang Kai will still be yours." Tian Shuiqing's tears dripped down and landed on the dark green piglet. The piglet seemed to have been woken up by the heat. It suddenly trembled and struggled violently. Tian Shuiqing was caught off guard and it actually managed to break free. The piglet then pounced on the several-meter-long snake behind it. Bolts of lightning struck the nether snake, causing it to retreat a few feet. Wang Kai used the last of its strength to shout, but it was too weak to do so. It could only whisper, "Master, run." Tian Shuiqing heard his murmur and stopped abruptly. She looked at Wang Kai, who was lying motionless on the ground. Her heart ached so much that she couldn't breathe. She didn't know when, but tears had already covered her face. Or stay. The netherworld snake slowly approached Wang Kai, as if it was ready to eat. At that moment, a clear sword light flashed and flew towards the netherworld snake from a tricky angle. The netherworld snake did not manage to dodge it completely and was cut in its body. Fresh red blood flowed out. Who was it? Oh. Chapter 2402. Tian Xueqing was startled. Her vision blurred as she saw a light-colored figure flying towards her from the horizon. His white robes fluttered in the wind as a brilliant golden light enveloped his body, making him extremely dazzling. He was like the sun, bringing hope and light to her desperate situation. Ji Yunhuang. Tian Xueqing's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth slightly. You, Ji Yunhuang's gaze turned cold. Why didn't you call me when you came here? Tian Xueqing had yet to regain her senses from the shock. Yesterday, he had left in a huff, which made her feel uncomfortable. Furthermore, she had little pig Wang Kai, who could use the lightning technique, by her side, so she came alone. She took a deep breath. I didn't think it would be so dangerous. I used to pick herbs alone. She was just used to being alone. After saying this, she hurriedly looked at Little Pig. Suddenly, she screamed, "Save Wang Kai!" The snake had not given up on Little Pig. Its long body flashed as it pounced on Little Pig who had fallen to the ground. The sword light suddenly flashed and with a sharp whistling sound, it formed a blue sword array and trapped the hell snake. No matter how nimble it was, it could not escape from this inescapable net. Its body was pierced several times, and its blood dyed the grass red. It slowly seeped into the soil, and the grass seemed to have been corroded by its blood as it was instantly charred black. The hell snake softly fell to the ground, its breath weak. Ji Yunhuang trapped the hell snake, but did not immediately kill it. He took out a small jade bottle from somewhere and took some of its blood. Then, he used a special method to extract the hell snake's venom and dripped it into the jade bottle. After that, he killed the hell snake with a single slash. Then, he turned his sword and took out its green inner core. He cast a cleansing spell on it and threw it to Tian Xueqing along with the bottle. Ji Yunhuang peeled the snake's skin and said indifferently, "Let Wang Kai take the inner core first. Half of the antidote in the bottle should be taken externally and the other half should be taken orally." Tian Xueqing caught it, nodded, and ran towards Wang Kai. Tian Xueqing understood this method of detoxification, but she did not expect Ji Yunhuang to know it so clearly and be so familiar with it. Tian Xueqing took the jade bottle and pressed it on a certain spot on Wang Kai's body. Wang Kai involuntarily opened its mouth. She fed Wang Kai the nether snake's nether elixir and then applied half of the antidote on the outside and the other half on the inside. She didn't bring any bandages and was about to tear off a piece of her dress to bandage Wang Kai's wound when a long snake suddenly appeared in front of her. Her face paled. She did not know when Ji Yunhuang had finished skinning the snake. At this moment, he was standing beside her with a small strip of snake skin in his hand. Use the snake skin of the netherworld snake to bandage Wang Kai. It will help it recover faster. Tian Xueqing looked at the snake skin and was stunned for a moment, but she still took it. Her actions were fast and professional. In just a moment, Wang Kai's wound was bandaged. The antidote took effect very quickly. The dark green piglet's color began to fade bit by bit. It was no longer as green as before. After Tian Xueqing finished treating Wang Kai's wound, she suddenly saw a spot of blood on Ji Yunhuang's left hand. She instinctively grabbed his hand and pried his palm open. It was scarlet. Although it was not deep enough to see the bone, it was still very deep. She could see the bright red blood slowly seeping out. "How did you get injured?" she nervously blurted out. Ji Yunhuang pursed his lips. "I was cut by grass. It's nothing, oh." Chapter 2403. Yesterday, he was a little sad and tossed and turned in bed for half the night, thinking about what he should do. He only fell asleep at dawn and woke up a little later in the morning. After thinking for a while, he decided to look for her. However, he did not expect Xiao Tong to tell him that she went to Mount Qinghua early in the morning to pick herbs. Ji Yunhuang's expression changed greatly. He had wandered the Jianghu for many years and was very familiar with herbs and mountains. He knew that the place where the netherworld flower grew was not only dangerous, but also had the netherworld snake as its guardian beast. With Tian Xueqing's mediocre skills, she was definitely not the netherworld snake's opponent. His heart was burning with anxiety. When he was climbing the mountain, he was careless and almost fell down. He hurriedly grabbed onto a bunch of grass to stabilize himself, but the edge of the grass was full of jagged edges. At the critical moment, he saved Tian Xueqing and her Wang Kai. Although he was thankful for his luck, the anger in his heart also rose and his expression was not good. He was the grand disciple of the venerable emperor, but he was actually injured by grass. He also felt a little embarrassed and wanted to withdraw his hand. However, Tian Xueqing's small hand held onto his and she frowned slightly. "Don't move, I'll bandage your wound." Her voice was gentle like a wisp of wind blowing through his heart. Ji Yunhuang's heart warmed and his body stiffened. Sure enough, he did not move. Her small hand moved around his palm and he could clearly feel the temperature of her fingertips. It was still a little cold. It was obvious that she was badly frightened just now. Ji Yunhuang looked down at Tian Xueqing, who was busying herself with his wound, and he was a little dazed. This scene was so familiar, just like those warm but sorrowful days 100 years ago, when the spring breeze brought warmth and he was slightly injured, but he could clearly see the pain in her eyes. She would silently sit by the side and carefully bandage his wound. From this angle, he could see her fluttering eyelashes, long and curled, like a small fan. Now that this scene appeared again, Ji Yunhuang felt both satisfied and sad. Fate was like a strange circle. After experiencing the heart-wrenching pain of being separated by life and death, she was once again brought to his side. "All right, don't let the wound get wet. Try not to use too much strength. Don't eat spicy food for the next few days." Tian Xueqing carefully adjusted the angle of the bandage as she instructed him. Halfway through, she remembered that he was also a very skilled doctor. She couldn't help but say in a low voice, "I'm too long-winded. I forgot that you also know about this." Ji Yunhuang lowered his eyes and looked at the azure bandage on his palm, lost in thought. A gentle breeze blew past, and the slightly longer edge of the bandage was blown up by the wind. It tickled his palm, causing him to feel a slight itch. His heart felt like it was being scratched by a kitten's little paw. It was slightly itchy. The little bit of unhappiness he once had also vanished into thin air. Why was he so angry with her? After all, she did not know anything. Bitterness welled up in his heart. He closed his eyes slightly and calmed his churning emotions. When he opened his eyes again, it was already clear. He looked at her and said, "No, I don't know." He had always treated her concern as a treasure, so how could he find her nagging? Tian Xueqing stared blankly for a moment. She suspiciously raised her eyes and looked into his warm eyes. His eyes were dark like the stars in the cold night. At this moment, there was a faint warmth in them, like the radiance of the silver moon. Tian Xueqing saw herself in his eyes. Her heart suddenly jumped and her mind was in a daze. It was as if she had seen his eyes like this a long, long time ago. Chapter 2404. However, the person he was looking at did not seem to be her. It was as if someone had plucked a string in her heart, causing her to tremble and feel pain. She looked at him with a puzzled expression, but her eyes were clear. His figure was clearly reflected in her pair of big eyes. Ji Yunhuang's mind was shaken and his heart was in turmoil. He lifted his arm and pulled her into his embrace. His voice was like a sigh as he said, "Xueqing." He was taking advantage of her again. Tian Shuiqing's body stiffened. Just as she was about to push him away, his body swayed slightly as if he was about to fall. Tian Shuiqing was shocked and did not dare to push him away. Instead, she hugged him tightly and asked, "What's wrong with you?" She was small and short, so it was naturally difficult for her to hug the tall and big Ji Yunhuang. Ji Yunhuang naturally did not dare to press his entire body on top of hers. He only slightly closed his eyes and said, "I feel a little dizzy. Could it be that you were poisoned when you were skinning the snake?" Tian Shuiqing guessed. She grabbed his hand and wanted to check his pulse. However, Ji Yunhuang held her hand and said in a low voice, "Don't move. I'll be fine after a while." Tian Shuiqing was speechless. She wanted to support him to the big rock at the side to sit down and rest. However, she did not expect that when she moved, he would hold her tightly and said, "Don't move. If you move, I'll feel dizzy." Tian Shuiqing was stunned for a moment. Alright, since he risked his life to save her and Piglet, she would let him lean on her for a while. His cold breath was like the water of an icy spring. When it reached her nose, her heart could not help but beat faster. There was a faint feeling of familiarity in her heart. It was as if she had smelled this kind of breath before and was greedy for this kind of breath. She did not know what was wrong with her. When he hugged her like this, she actually felt a faint sense of satisfaction and laziness after her desire was satisfied. This feeling made her subconsciously feel afraid. It was as if once she was greedy for this kind of feeling, she would be sent to the 18th level of hell. This kind of fear came suddenly, but it was so clear. Her body instantly stiffened like a piece of wood. The scent of the person in his arms was both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Back then, Tian Shuiqing often had a faint medicinal fragrance on her body. That medicinal fragrance was actually very intoxicating, but he only felt annoyed at that time. Every time he had no choice but to do it with her, he felt like he was being trapped and schemed against. So every time he was done, he would impatiently slam the door and leave, not even looking at her who was lying there in despair. He could not think about the past. Once he thought about it, he would regret it from head to toe. Fortunately, he found her again. That should be her, right? Oh. His name was, his appearance was, and his aura was. Ji Yunhuang half-hugged Tian Shuiqing and sent a wisp of psychokinesis into her body. Tian Shuiqing's soul gradually appeared in his mind. Exquisite facial features, an ethereal and indifferent aura, and eyes that were eternally calm. Even though 100 years had passed since then, she was still so familiar when he saw her again. His memory was so fresh that it was as if it had just happened yesterday. It really was her. It really was her. His sixth sense was right. Although he was already mentally prepared, once he confirmed it, the joy in his heart still overflowed. After 100 years, he had finally found her again. He hugged her even tighter. His heart ached as if he was drowning, and his voice sounded like he was sighing. Shuiqing. He hugged her so tightly that Tian Shuiqing's body became stiffer and stiffer. In the end, she was as stiff as a stone statue. Chapter 2405. Ji Yunhuang finally sensed that something was wrong. He loosened his embrace and looked at her. "What happened to you?" Tian Shuiqing raised her eyes and glanced at him. This glance made Ji Yunhuang's heart turn cold. There was an obvious alienation in her eyes and her voice was cold and angry. "You probed my soul. Who do you think I am?" Ji Yunhuang was stunned. For a moment, the atmosphere was so quiet that it was scary. Even the wind in the canyon slowed down. Tian Shuiqing looked at him and felt more and more disappointed. She coldly looked away. "If you don't want to say, then forget it." Right at this moment, Wang Kai Piglet suddenly groaned and slowly woke up. Tian Shuiqing glanced at him and turned to walk towards Wang Kai. Wang Kai's body had already regained its pink color. It stood up shakily and threw itself into Tian Xueqing's embrace. Master. I thought I would never see you again. Tian Xueqing patted Wang Kai's head and did not say anything. Her fingers were slightly cold. Wang Kai crawled out from Tian Xueqing's embrace. Its black eyes were filled with confusion. Master, how were we saved? Tian Xueqing patted its head. It was young Master Ji who saved us. Wang Kai, thank young Master Ji. Wang Kai then noticed the person in white clothes not far away. It suddenly felt that Ji Yunhuang was more pleasing to the eye. However, its tone was still arrogant. I have decided not to hate you. After a long time, it said almost inaudibly, also, thank you. Ji Yunhuang did not pay attention to it. He only looked at Tian Xueqing with a complicated gaze. His lips moved and he took a deep breath. Xueqing. Tian Xueqing obviously did not want to talk to him anymore. All right, my master is still waiting for these herbs to save his life. Young Master Ji, we have already picked the flowers. Let's go back. Ji Yunhuang. Okay. With a creak, the door was gently pushed open and a ray of sunlight jumped in. Ji Yunhuang opened his eyes. The gentle sunlight shone on his face and the white light around his body slowly dissipated. His eyes were still filled with displeasure from being disturbed. However, the moment he saw the person who came in, his displeasure dissipated like smoke. Tian Xueqing walked in. She was bathed in the brilliant sunlight. The golden light softened her face, making her expression somewhat blurry. Ji Yunhuang's heart skipped a beat as he jumped up from the bed. Xueqing, you're here. She actually took the initiative to look for him. Tian Xueqing stopped in her tracks and looked away to avoid his surprised gaze. Yes. Without waiting for Ji Yunhuang to say anything, she had already walked in front of him and went straight to the point. Young Master Ji, let's make a deal. A deal? Ji Yunhuang felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over him. He looked at her for a moment and asked, what kind of deal? Tian Xueqing coughed softly and looked at him sincerely. My master has already taken the antidote, but the ice soul poison is extremely potent. In order to completely eradicate it, it requires a person with an extremely profound psyche power to circulate and force it out. How about this? If you help me cure my master, I'll write off all the money you owe me. The debt between us is cleared. Young Master Ji is a dragon among men, surely you wouldn't be willing to stay here, right? It's better for you to leave as soon as possible. Presumably, Buddha Lotus Mountain also needs second master to go back and hold the fort. She said all the words that she had been thinking about for a long time without pausing, as if she was afraid of being interrupted. This time, Ji Yunhuang did not interrupt her. He did not even have the intention to open his mouth. There was a long silence. Chapter 2406. There was a long silence. Outside the window, the leaves rustled in the wind. There were unknown birds chirping on the branches, and the clear and melodious chirping of birds could be heard. The room was quiet, so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. Tian Xueqing suddenly became nervous and unconsciously clenched her sleeves. She stood in front of him, and her figure blocked most of the sunlight. Only a small amount of sunlight passed through and shone on his body. Ji Yunhuang lowered his eyes, and his eyelashes left a faint shadow under his eyelids. In this half-light and half-dark situation, his expression was somewhat unreal. She slightly turned her body, and more sunlight shone on his body. He seemed to be unaccustomed to the sudden sunlight, and slightly closed his eyes. Tian Xueqing suddenly realized that Ji Yunhuang's face was somewhat pale. She was about to say something, but he had already opened his eyes. The bright sunlight shone on his face, but but it did not reach his eyes. His eyes were extremely dark, like a ball of thick ink that could not be melted, without a trace of light. The pain disappeared in an instant, and it was so fast that Tian Shuiqing thought that she was seeing things. He finally opened his mouth. His voice was somewhat low and hoarse, and he lightly said a word. Good. He smiled again and said, good. His smile made Tian Shuiqing's heart ache. But his word also made her sigh in relief. She ignored the indescribable pain in her heart. Her eyes lit up with joy. Good, then come over in the afternoon. I will go and prepare first. You can continue meditating. I will not disturb you. Then she turned around and walked out. The door opened with a creak, and then suddenly closed. The sunlight was blocked outside. Ji Yunhuang opened his eyes and smiled bitterly. Meditating required a calm mind. If he meditated now, he was afraid that he would suffer from qi deviation, in a quiet room. Tian Shuiqing looked at the two people sitting on the wooden bed, and her eyes could not hide her nervousness. GMO, who was wearing a green robe, sat in front of her. His body was surrounded by a white light, and as the white light became stronger, his pale face slowly improved. Blue ice crystals continuously fell from his fingertips. Ji Yunhuang was dressed in a white robe with complicated dark patterns embroidered with silver thread. The silver patterns flickered as the white light in his palm flickered. His eyes were slightly closed, and his handsome face was slightly pale. He placed his palm on Ji Mo's back, and a white light surged. More and more ice crystals fell from Ji Mo's fingertips. The ice crystals piled up together, emitting traces of coldness. It was clearly the dog days of summer, but the room was as cold as an ice house. Gradually, the number of ice crystals decreased, and Ji Mo's complexion became much rosier. Ji Yunhuang's complexion became paler and paler, but the white light in his palm became more and more intense until it was almost blinding. It wasn't until Ji Mo's fingertips could no longer force out half of the ice crystals that he slowly stopped. He exhaled and opened his eyes, which were filled with unconcealable exhaustion. I'm done. Tian Shuiqing ran over, but not to him. Instead, she ran to GMO. Her little hand reached out to feel Ji Mo's pulse, and felt his pulse. Her little face was full of joy, and she smiled happily and contentedly, Master. The poison in your body has been completely removed. Ji Mo's complexion was rosy, and he replied with a smile, it's all thanks to Shuiqing and young Master Ji. He turned around and cupped his hands towards Ji Yunhuang. Young Master Ji's life-saving grace, I will definitely repay you in the future. Shuiqing, thank young Master Ji for me. Chapter 2407. Tian Shuiqing was stunned for a moment. She lowered her eyes and then looked at Ji Yunhuang with sincerity. Thank you, young Master Ji, for saving my master. The debt between us is written off. She was really thinking about writing off the debt with him at all times. How could she know that the debt between them was so complicated that it could never be written off? Ji Yunhuang slowly looked at her. After a long time, he said something with an indiscernible voice. You're too polite. Tian Shuiqing was speechless. Ji Yunhuang slowly walked down. His body suddenly swayed for a moment before he steadied himself. However, his face was even paler than before. It was almost the same color as the robe he was wearing. Tian Shuiqing felt that her heart had also swayed. She couldn't help but walk in front of him. Are you all right? She reached out her hand to check on him. However, Ji Yunhuang calmly avoided her hand. His tone was indifferent. I'm fine. Tian Shuiqing looked at her empty palm. Her heart felt a little empty. She calmly retracted her hand. Then you should rest well. Ji Yunhuang coldly nodded his head and slowly walked out. When he reached the door, his body swayed again. Fortunately, he held onto the door frame in time to stabilize himself. His face was even paler and he was sweating profusely. Tian Xueqing's heart twitched. She said dryly, "Be careful." Ji Yunhuang turned a deaf ear to her words and walked away step by step. His silhouette was somewhat bleak and desolate, and the dark patterns on his white robe were much dimmer. Tian Xueqing looked at his silhouette and felt as if a huge rock was pressing down on her heart. "Xueqing, young Master Ji is not feeling well. Go and take care of him." Ji Mo's voice sounded from behind her. Tian Xueqing hesitated for a moment. She turned her head and seemed to be hesitating. Ji Mo smiled. "Don't worry. Master's poison has been cured. You should take good care of young Master Ji." Tian Xueqing nodded. "Then Master, you should rest well. Disciple will leave first." She hurriedly walked out. Ji Mo looked at Tian Xueqing's hurried back. A trace of deep thought flashed through his eyes. In his impression, even if the sky fell, this disciple of his would be calm and unhurried. When had she ever been so hurried? Ji Yunhuang's sleeves fluttered in the wind as he slowly walked along the winding corridor. The scenery on both sides of the corridor served as a foil for him. His face was pale, and his lips were almost bloodless. His white robes fluttered in the wind, and he looked as if he would fly away with the wind at any moment. Tian Xueqing caught up with him. Looking at his back, she pursed her lips. There was a faint aura of indifference and nobility around him. She felt like she was being ostracized. Just as Ji Yunhuang was about to walk out of the corridor, she quickly stepped forward to support him. So cold. It was so cold that Tian Xueqing almost flung her hand away. However, she placed her entire palm on his arm, and the chill spread through her palm. It didn't feel like a human arm, but more like an icicle. Something was wrong. His body temperature was too low. A normal person wouldn't be so cold. Almost reflexively, she reached for his pulse, wanting to find out what was wrong with him. Her speed was very fast, but Ji Yunhuang's speed was even faster. He silently avoided her hand once again. He seemed to be avoiding her touch. Tian Xueqing was stunned for a moment. She suddenly felt very uncomfortable. However, treating the patient was the most important thing right now. She suppressed the uneasiness in her heart and explained in a low voice, "You are very strange right now. I will only know the specific situation after I check your pulse." Chapter 2408. Ji Yunhuang glanced at her indifferently with a complicated look in his eyes. His tone carried a hint of alienation. "No need. I know my injuries very well. Moreover, we are even now, aren't we? If she came to care for him because of guilt, sympathy, or because of another man's orders, it was better not to come." Tian Xueqing suddenly felt a dull pain in her heart. It was as if her heart had been ruthlessly squeezed by someone. His indifference hurt her. She looked away, pursed her lips, and tried to explain. "I'm a doctor." Ji Yunhuang flicked his sleeve, and her hand fell from his arm. Without looking at her, he continued to walk forward. Tian Xueqing looked down at her own hand, and her eyes suddenly felt a little sour. The temperature of her palm slowly returned to normal, but her heart felt a little lost. Just now, was she really too much? He must have used a lot of psychokinesis to help her master expel the poison. Otherwise, his face would not be so pale. Yet, she secretly chased him away. She did not know why, but she wanted to chase him away. She did not want him to stay here any longer, as if he was a scourge. However, chasing him away at that time was indeed a little too much, wrong. Since she made a mistake, she had to correct it. Tian Xueqing raised her eyes and ran forward to catch up with Ji Yunhuang. Before he could react, she held his arm, not allowing him to refuse. You are still my patient. You have to listen to me. Her tone was somewhat childish and arrogant. Ji Yunhuang's body stiffened, and he looked down at her without saying a word. Tian Xueqing's face was tense. She tried to make herself look less nervous, but the weakness in her eyes could not help but reveal itself. Ji Yunhuang's eyes moved, and he turned his head to look at the clouds in the distance. He did not brush her hand away. Tian Xueqing saw that he turned his head away and ignored her, and her eyes were slightly disappointed. After an unknown period of time, he sighed and finally compromised. Send me back to Jingxinyuan first. Tian Xueqing's eyes lit up, and she followed him back. On the way back, Ji Yunhuang was somewhat restless. He looked at Tian Xueqing who was supporting him, and his heart was filled with complex feelings. He did not know what to think. What happened? Why is there ice soul poison in your body? Tian Xueqing's voice sounded, and it was filled with anger that she did not understand. Ji Yunhuang lay on the bed with his eyes closed. Tian Xueqing looked at him and felt even angrier. She didn't know why she was so angry. Don't you know the reason? Ji Yunhuang opened his eyes and suddenly asked an irrelevant question, do you care? Tian Xueqing was confused by the question and subconsciously said, of course I care. Did you get poisoned when you were helping Master force out the poison? Was that why she cared if he was poisoned or not? Ji Yunhuang felt as if he had stepped on air. His chest felt stuffy, so he simply closed his eyes and ignored her. He needed some time to think about his next step. Tian Xueqing pursed her lips. She didn't know how she had offended him again, so she didn't say anything and directly gave him acupuncture. I have already suppressed the poison in your body. You should rest well. Tian Xueqing pulled out the needle and turned to leave. The moment she stood up, she was suddenly pulled back by a strong force. Caught off guard, she fell to the side of the bed and her upper body fell onto Ji Yunhuang's body. Chapter 2409. There was still a faint smell of medicine on his body, which mixed with his original cold body fragrance. It was indescribably pleasant. Tian Xueqing wanted to get up in a flurry, but was held in his embrace. She raised her head and angrily glared at him. Let go of me. Ji Yunhuang's face was still pale, and his dark eyes looked straight into her heart. Where are you going? The smell of his body was overwhelming, causing Tian Xueqing to be both flustered and angry. She suddenly pushed him away. It's none of your business. Her push was a little heavy, causing him to roll on the bed. Naturally, he let go of her. Tian Xueqing jumped up. After all, she was still a teenage girl and was inexperienced. His hug just now was extremely aggressive, causing her heart to beat like thunder even though she pushed him away. She lowered her sleeves and held a poison needle between her fingers. Just as she was about to stab him, she coldly said, If you dare to take advantage of me again, I will cripple you. This sentence was full of threat. Ji Yunhuang lay there, slightly gasping for breath, but his gaze was fixed on her. Can you bear to? Tian Xueqing was speechless. If it was another man who did such a thing and said such a sentence, Tian Xueqing would probably stab him without a second thought. What was there to be reluctant about? He was not anyone to her. He was only her patient and servant. No, now that he had paid off his debt to her, he was not even a servant anymore. She twirled the silver needle in her hand and snorted. Seeing that you saved my master's life, I will let you off for now. I will not fuss over your rudeness this time, but if there is a next time, what will happen if there is a next time? Ji Yunhuang simply propped himself up with one arm. Tian Xueqing's small face tensed up. I will definitely make you beg for death. Ji Yunhuang slightly closed his eyes and lay on the bed again. He seemed to be sighing and calm at the same time. I have already begged for death. He lay there with his long eyelashes drooping. Because of his injuries, his face was extremely pale, giving him a kind of fragile and dejected beauty. Tian Shuoqing's heart felt as if it was pierced by something. This kind of him gave her a faint feeling of familiarity, as if she had seen him like this many years ago. She turned around and quickly left. She left just like that. As Ji Yunhuang lay there, a sense of helplessness rose in his heart. It seemed that no matter what he did, he could not enter her heart. She was always guarded against him. Ji Mo's poison was actually very complicated. Using medicine alone to expel the poison was not enough to cure it. Someone had to suck out the ice soul root, and once the ice soul root was sucked out, it had to enter the body. This time, in order to heal Ji Mo's injuries, he had consumed more than half of his psychokinesis. Moreover, he had also drawn the ice soul poison into his body. However, he had relied on his profound psychokinesis and good physical foundation to suppress it. Now that he had relaxed, he felt as if an icy thread was swimming in his body. Wherever it went, he felt as if it was about to freeze. This icy soul frost poison was indeed powerful. No wonder that GMO was almost frozen into an ice sculpture. In order to completely expel the remaining ice soul poison from his body, he would have to pluck the netherworld flower again. The place where the netherworld flower grew was very dangerous. He did not want Tian Shuoqing to take any more risks, so he could only rest up and do it himself. He began to circulate his martial arts, wanting to use his superior martial arts to force the poison to a certain place. Just as he closed his eyes, the door was pushed open with a bang. His body shook and he opened his eyes. When he saw the person who had come in, his pupils slightly shrank. The person who had come in was Tian Shuoqing. Chapter 24:10. The person who came in was Tian Shuoqing. She seemed to have rushed over in a hurry. In her hands was a brocade robe that was folded neatly. It was obvious that it had been washed. This was the brocade robe that she had confiscated from him. That brocade robe was actually a magic robe. Not only was it made of rare materials, it was also enchanted with a protective spell. Normally, it would not be dirty. Occasionally, it would be stained with a bit of dust. Tian Shuoqing did not know the value of this robe. Even if it was worth 10,000 taels of gold, it would still be difficult to buy it. This is the robe I gave you. You don't have to be my servant anymore. Tian Shuoqing said as soon as she opened her mouth. Ji Yunhuang's expression slightly changed. Was she trying to chase him away by giving him back the robe? He was still injured, and she was already so impatient. His heart seemed to have been stabbed by a knife. He slowly sat up and stared at her without saying a word. Tian Shuoqing was frightened by his gaze. She could not remember what she was going to say after that. She placed the robe beside him and said, "You can check if your robe is damaged." Before she could finish her sentence, her wrist was suddenly grabbed. She felt dizzy and her whole body was pulled onto the bed. She was pressed under his body. His body temperature was very strange. It was half cold and half hot. He was pressing on her petite body, trapping her. "Shuoqing, do you want me to leave so badly? Do you know that I..." His eyes were burning and his hot breath blew on her cheeks, making Tian Shuoqing's whole body freeze. Even if she did not know the ways of the world, she was still a young girl who was about to reach marriageable age. She was about to fall in love. Being bullied by a grown man like this, her head exploded and her heart beat like a drum. For a moment, she forgot to react. She was right in his arms. The person he had been looking for 100 years was right in his arms. The scene of them being intimate 100 years ago flashed in his mind. His heart was stirred. Shueching, he lowered his head and kissed her. Their lips touched, and a hot and familiar breath instantly enveloped Tian Shueching. She was about to regain her senses, but the moment he forcefully opened her mouth, she was instantly sent flying, their lips intertwined, their tongues intertwined. Her breath was sweet and beautiful, making him unable to control himself once he kissed her. He held her tightly in his arms, and his arms tightened uncontrollably. He wished he could pull her into his body and make her a part of him. From now on, they would never be separated, no matter what happened, they would never be able to be separated. Although he had been intimate with her countless times 100 years ago, he had no choice but to do so in order to get rid of the poison. Therefore, even though they had done the most intimate thing between a man and a woman, he had never kissed her, not even when it was the most intense. This was the first time he had kissed her wholeheartedly, and 100 years had passed in between. Shueching, Shueching. His kiss was like a hurricane that engulfed her entire body, making it hard for her to breathe. The closer she got to him, the more familiar and dangerous his aura became. She couldn't think straight. Something seemed to snap in his head, leaving behind only a rumbling sound. The intense kiss seemed to have ignited the passion that had been dormant for 100 years. Ji Yunhuang's mind was in a daze. He hugged and kissed the person in his arms, and his hands could not help but wander around her body, as if he wanted to make up for the intimacy he owed her 100 years ago. Shueching, Shueching. I've been looking for you so hard. He murmured beside her lips. Tian Shueching suddenly froze, and all her senses came back. Chapter 24:11. Paw. A clear and resounding slap resounded. Ji Yunhuang was in a daze and did not expect Tian Shueching to slap him. This slap landed squarely on his face. Although Tian Shueching's martial arts were not high, she was still very strong. Ji Yunhuang's body tilted from the slap and rolled to the side. Tian Shueching scrambled to get out from under him and jumped to the ground. Her face was ashen and her heart was beating wildly, as if it was going to jump out of her throat. Ji Yunhuang, you bastard. In the end, she was still young. Although she was extremely angry to the point that her whole body was trembling, she could only curse out one sentence. There was an indescribable bitterness rolling in his chest. What did he think of her as? Did he look for her for a long time? Did he think of her as someone else? Ever since this person came here, her peaceful life had been disrupted and she had a strange feeling. She had never felt so confused before. She tightly gripped the poison needle in her hand as if it was her only support. She coldly said, Ji Yunhuang, I already said that if you take advantage of me again, I will cripple you. The poison needle was about to shoot out. After she finished her threat, she realized that Ji Yunhuang, who had been slapped to the side, did not move at all. Don't pretend to be dead, it's useless. Tian Shueching angrily said. Ji Yunhuang still did not move. Tian Shueching started to panic. He couldn't have fainted, right? It shouldn't be. This person was so strong, how could he be knocked unconscious by her slap? He must be faking it. Although she was so sure, her heart was still flustered. She wanted to go forward and check, but she did not dare to. Just at this moment, little pig Wang Kai came in. Tian Shueching let it go to the bed to check. Wang Kai was not afraid of Ji Yunhuang. Its round little body directly jumped onto the bed. Its little pig nose sniffed Ji Yunhuang's face and reported, Master, he is dead. Bang! Tian Shueching's mind seemed to explode. Dead, dead? How could it be? She had only slapped him once, that's all. Could it be that her slap had coincidentally landed on his temple? She directly rushed over and touched his body with her fingers. Her heart was as cold as his body temperature. His body was ice cold, colder than a dead person. She flipped him over. His eyes were tightly shut, and there was a clear palm print on his snow-white cheek. It was a ghastly sight. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and his lips were pale. She was, after all, a doctor. Although she was flustered, she did not panic. She first checked his breathing, then his neck and wrist. When she could not feel anything, her fingers trembled. She simply lay on his chest and listened to his heartbeat. His body was extremely cold, as if he was covered in a layer of ice in an instant. It made her tremble a little as she leaned against his chest. Is he dead? Is he dead? His body is so cold. He is not panting, and his heart is not beating. Wang Kai concluded, he must have been dead for a long time. Scram! Tian Xueqing said to Wang Kai. He still had a heartbeat, but it was very slow. It only beat once after a while. It was very weak, but it was very regular. His ice soul poison was acting up. However, this was the first time she had seen him in such a state since she started practicing medicine. Tian Xueqing was at a loss of what to do. She took out a needle and wanted to stab it into his hand to wake him up. Just as the needle was about to touch his skin, he suddenly flipped his wrist and held on to her little hand. His corpse is coming back to life. Wang Kai let out a loud cry and immediately charged forward, aiming for Ji Yunhuang's arm. Master, run! Chapter 24:12. Before its small body could hit Ji Yunhuang, it was sent flying by a blue light. With a bang, it landed on the door and slid to the ground. Tian Xueqing only felt that the other party's hand was like an iron hoop, tightly wrapping around her slender wrist, causing her to be unable to move at all. Although his face was extremely pale, his tightly shut eyes had already opened. His black jade-like pupils stared at her, and there seemed to be disbelief in his eyes. Xueqing, do you really want to poison me to death? His voice was extremely hoarse. I want to save you. Tian Xueqing blurted out. Ji Yunhuang's gaze shifted to the needle in her hand. Tian Xueqing also looked at it, and then she broke out in cold sweat. In her panic, she did not see clearly that the needle in her hand was not a life-saving silver needle, but an emerald green poisonous needle. Tian Xueqing was born beautiful, but her martial arts were ordinary, so it was easy for some lechers to covet her. Therefore, in order to protect herself, she not only owned a little pig that could release electricity, but also learned how to use poisonous needles. There were different kinds of poisonous needles. Some could make people unconscious, some could make people lose their ability to resist, and of course, there were also the most poisonous ones that could take a person's life within a few seconds. The needle in her hand was the most poisonous kind. Once it pierced into a person's skin, that person would definitely kick the person's leg and die. I took the wrong one. I wanted to use the silver needle to wake you up, but you fainted just now. No, there is no heartbeat. Tian Xueqing explained in a mess. Ji Yunhuang's hand slightly loosened, and his eyes seemed to be flowing with light. Don't be afraid, I'm not dead. How could he, a cultivator, die so easily? Tian Xueqing finally withdrew her hand and hurriedly put away the poisonous needle again. When she looked at Ji Yunhuang again, her gaze was somewhat suspicious. Were you faking it just now? Ji Yunhuang slowly withdrew his hand. Look. Do I look like I was faking it? His face was still pale, and his once light red lips were now devoid of color. Cold sweat flowed down his forehead, probably because of the soul chill poison in his body. The sweat that flowed out of his forehead condensed into ice crystals, making him look like a vampire that could not be exposed to light. This kind of appearance was naturally not something that could be faked. Tian Shuiqing was a little regretful for her previous question. You. What happened to you just now? She didn't believe that she could knock him out with one slap. Ji Yunhuang closed his eyes slightly. Before Tian Shuiqing had arrived, he had been circulating his energy to force the ice soul poison into his meridians. However, after her arrival, his emotions were in turmoil. At this time, he should have been recuperating, but Tian Shuiqing had forced him to kiss her, causing his injuries to worsen. Tian Shuiqing's palm strike was like the straw that broke the camel's back, causing the ice soul poison to erupt and rush towards his heart. Once a martial artist cultivated their martial arts to the extreme, their body would have an automatic protective mechanism. When the poison took effect, their body would automatically activate the protective mode, causing their entire body to enter a state of tortoiseshell. Their blood vessels would almost stop flowing, and naturally, their breathing and pulse would be completely absent, as if they were dead. After all, he was an immortal. Even though his body was in the state of tortoiseshell, his external senses were still extremely shocking. She used a poisonous needle to stab him, triggering his body's automatic protection skill once again. Only then did he manage to stop her murder at the critical moment. As for Piggy Wongkai, he was also sent flying by his self-protection aura. Ji Yunhuang explained everything to Tian Shuiqing in a few words. Tian Shuiqing looked at him with a complicated gaze. It turned out that after becoming an immortal, one's self-protection skill would be so powerful. Oh. Chapter 24:13. After all, he was seriously injured to save her master. Seeing him like this, Tian Shuiqing felt a little guilty. When she saw the clear palm print on his face, the guilt doubled. Ji Yunhuang's gaze fell on her pale face and saw her guilt. His heart warmed. Don't be afraid. Tian Shuiqing pursed her lips. I'm not afraid. You're the one dying, not me. Although she said this, her heart was still beating wildly. This person took advantage of her and stole her first kiss. Logically speaking, she should have stabbed him to death. But seeing him almost die just now, she actually panicked. Ji Yunhuang seemed to have been stung by her words. His eyes darkened slightly, but he immediately chuckled. Neither of us wants to die. He then added another sentence in his heart. I'd rather die than let you die. Neither of them wanted to die. Whoever died would be an irreplaceable regret for both of them. He was obviously seriously injured, but his smile was alluring. The saying, a stranger is like jade, a gentleman is unparalleled in this world, probably referred to people like him. Her master, GMO, was a handsome man with a gentle temperament. This person's temperament was similar to her master's, but her master was not as beautiful and aggressive as him. He looked elegant and handsome, but his aura was extremely oppressive. He was like a peerless sword hidden in a scabbard, making people's hearts beat faster. Tian Shuiqing suddenly shifted her gaze away from him and calmed herself down. She coldly said, don't use your psychokinesis, or else you'll easily go berserk. I'll force the poison in your body to other places. Ji Yunhuang looked at her for a moment, then smiled, okay. Tian Shuiqing heaved a sigh of relief and began to work beside him. Ji Yunhuang slightly closed his eyes and sensed everything about her. Her fingers lightly touched his body, and her breath was beside him. She pierced a silver needle into his body, but he did not feel any pain. He only felt a slight itch, and even a tingling sensation. The afternoon sun shone in. It was warm and quiet, and they could only hear each other's breathing. Even the pig did not dare to make a sound. It walked over with its cat-like steps and lay down beside him, watching with its round eyes. Tian Shuiqing inserted the needles very quickly, but this kind of acupuncture technique also consumed a lot of energy. After a set of acupuncture techniques, her forehead was covered with sweat, but fortunately, she managed to control the ice soul poison in Ji Yunhuang's body. She heaved a sigh of relief and stood up. Suddenly, she swayed and her vision went dark. Her body tilted and fell right onto Ji Yunhuang's body. Ji Yunhuang groaned, startling Tian Xueqing. She hurriedly struggled to get up, but her hand was pressed somewhere, causing Ji Yunhuang to groan again. He grabbed her wrist and said, "Don't move, just now." Tian Xueqing was too tired and had gotten up too hastily, which was why she blacked out for a moment. Now that she had recovered, she didn't dare to move when she heard Zhang Xian's voice. She looked at him nervously. His face was so pale that it was almost bloodless. "How are you feeling?" Tian Xueqing was struggling to maintain her half-lying position on him. Ji Yunhuang slowly exhaled. His voice was hoarse due to his illness. "I'm fine." Tian Xueqing was worried and wanted to check his pulse, but his face turned pale again. "Don't move," even this was not allowed. Tian Xueqing had some doubts in her heart, but she still did as she was told. She remained motionless in his embrace. Her face was buried in his embrace, so she could not see Ji Yunhuang's slightly curved lips. Chapter 24:14. After a long while, her muffled voice was heard, "Are you done?" Ji Yunhuang did not speak. Tian Xueqing slightly raised her head and her small mouth happened to rub against his beautiful chin, causing her face to turn red again. Ji Yunhuang suddenly got up. At this moment, he did not have much strength and naturally could not trap her, allowing her to easily escape. Tian Xueqing took 2 steps back, her heart still beating wildly. She wanted to say something, but her mind was in a mess and she did not know what to say. When she raised her head, she saw that Ji Yunhuang's deep eyes were still locked on her body. Her heart was in an indescribable mess. What happened to her? Recently, she kept getting into trouble. When she was struggling just now, she had dropped the robe that she had returned to Ji Yunhuang. She bent over to pick it up and placed it on the side of his bed. "Your clothes. You returned my clothes. Are you trying to chase me away?" Ji Yunhuang asked. Tian Xueqing was stunned for a moment. She originally did not have this intention. She just felt that since Ji Yunhuang had already paid off his debt, there was no need to hold on to his robe. Now that she heard him ask this question, her heart was moved. She did not know why, but although he was very gentle to her and even helped her a lot, she was subconsciously afraid of him. It was as if she got too close to him, she would fall into a trap and never be able to climb out. She subconsciously wanted to stay away from him and let him go. Therefore, after pausing for a moment, she did not deny it. She lightly coughed and said, "The debt between me and young master has already been settled. Once young master's cold poison is completely removed, you can leave." She paused for a moment. "Young master should rest well. I still have to visit master. Regarding young master's cold poison, Xueqing will think of a way." She turned around and was about to leave when Ji Yunhuang spoke, "You don't need to think about my cold poison. I have my own reasons." These words sounded as if he was angry. Tian Xueqing's feet paused for a moment. "That's good. Young master, please do as you wish." She turned around and left quickly without looking back. Ji Yunhuang slightly closed his eyes. She was still chasing him away, she was still thinking about her master. When she mentioned her master, her eyes shone brightly, causing him to feel dazzled, the familiar suffocating pain in his heart. His body slightly swayed and he spat out a mouthful of blood. "I can't think about it anymore. Otherwise, he might really lose his life here." It wasn't easy for him to find her. He hadn't reconciled with her yet, so how could he just give up like this? He tried his best to clear his mind and began to meditate to expel the poison. 2 days passed. Time seemed both fast and slow. Just like that, 2 more days passed. In the past 2 days, the cold poison in Ji Yunhuang's body had gradually spread to one of his forearms. As long as he persevered for another 2 days, he would be able to expel the cold poison from the rest of his body. His martial arts would also recover by half, and he would be able to pick the netherworld flower. Perhaps it was because he had once told Tian Shuiqing that he could treat his own injuries, so Tian Shuiqing felt at ease and boldly left him alone. She had not appeared in front of him for the past 2 days. Only the pig came to him every day, morning or evening. However, the servant still delivered food to him on time, and the quality of the food was quite good. After Ji Yunhuang slightly controlled the poison, he would also go out for a walk. The quiet valley where Tian Shuiqing lived was known as the Medical Valley in the outside world. Although the area wasn't large, there were mountains, rivers, lakes, and forests. The scenery of the lake and mountains was very elegant. Around the lake, there were a few small courtyards built in 2s and 3s. Chapter 24:15. A few small courtyards were built around the lake in 2s and 3s. Each courtyard had its own unique characteristics. It had a kind of tranquil rural atmosphere that could calm one's mind and dispel vulgar thoughts. From this point, it could be seen that GMO was not only a doctor, but also a refined scholar. There was an unwritten rule in the medical valley that all patients who came in for treatment, no matter how prominent their status was or how great their family background was, they would all be treated the same. Apart from those who were unconscious and unable to take care of themselves, they were not allowed to bring along any servants. The medical attendants in the medical valley were only in charge of changing the patient's medicine and delivering meals. They did not care about anything else. Even the rooms had to be cleaned up by the patients themselves, and their clothes had to be changed and washed by themselves. Therefore, Ji Yunhuang could occasionally see sloppily dressed young masters washing their clothes by the lake with endless resentment. This actually trained these people's ability to take care of themselves. There were men and women, old and young patients here. Ji Yunhuang already knew from the few days that there were 21 patients in the medical valley. In addition to the servants and Tian Shuiqing and her master, there were no less than 30 people in the medical valley. The more people there were, the more gossip there would be. Therefore, Ji Yunhuang also heard some gossip when he was strolling by the lake. For example, the place that Qing went to the most recently was Ji Mo's nurturing garden. She would often accompany Ji Mo to stroll by the lake to relax. For example, Qing had taken in a new patient. That patient's condition did not seem serious, but Qing went to that place the most frequently. When she was not accompanying her master, she spent almost all her time by that patient's side. Someone saw that the patient was a beautiful man. When he heard this gossip, Ji Yunhuang did not know what to feel. He stood by the lake and looked at the small building in the distance, lost in thought. In the past, he was number 1 in Tian Shuiqing's heart. Now, he did not know where he was placed in her heart. Was this retribution? He slightly closed his eyes. Perhaps. Every dog has its day. Today, he also tasted the feeling of being completely ignored by his sweetheart. His white robe fluttered in the wind, and his figure looked lonely yet free and easy. He was once the most handsome man in vast sky country, and this title was definitely not undeserved. He also cultivated an immortal physique, so he naturally had a kind of magnificence that ordinary people could not reach. No matter where he stood, he would definitely become a scene that no one could ignore. Every time he came out, there would be a lot of people strolling by the lakeside, especially those women. Even if they were injured or sick, they would come out at this time to create a chance encounter. There were even some bold ones who would deliberately leave behind a handkerchief, a jade pendant, or a jade hairpin every time they brushed past him. She was hoping that he would help her pick it up, and use this opportunity to strike up a conversation or two. However, they did not expect that Ji Yunhuang would turn a blind eye to all of this. His sleeves fluttered as he walked away, shattering the hearts of all the young girls. There was a kind of cold aura around him that made those who didn't like him dare to act rashly. At this moment, he stood by the lakeside and felt something in his heart. He casually took out an emerald green jade flute and played it. The sound of the flute leisurely floated around the lake and the mountains. The sound of the flute was extremely quiet, and when people heard it, they would forget their worries. Who knew how many people who heard it were stunned? Pfft. A light laugh interrupted this tranquil harmony. A voice leisurely sounded, "If you want to show off your elegance, go back home and show it off. What are you playing here for? Are you trying to attract someone's attention?" Chapter 24:16. His voice was extremely clear, but the words he said were unavoidably harsh and full of provocation. When the sound of the flute stopped, Ji Yunhuang looked over and saw a man wearing a top-quality robe standing not far behind him. His appearance was top quality, and his clothes were top quality. His appearance was extremely beautiful, to the point that people could not tell if he was a man or a woman. Even if all the beauties present were added together, they would not be as delicate as him. The robe he was wearing was naturally of the highest quality. It was a deep purple color, and embroidered on the corner of the robe was a surging flood dragon bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws. It was even more formidable than a dragon. However, his appearance gave people a very delicate feeling, as if he could be swayed by the wind. At this moment, he was looking at Ji Yunhuang with his head slightly tilted, like a proud little girl. His pair of big watery eyes were filled with disdain. It turned out to be a young marquis. Ji Yunhuang could guess his identity just by looking at the robe he was wearing. The youth looked to be around 17 or 18 years old. He should be the beautiful young master everyone was talking about. As expected, he was as beautiful as a painting. He looked like a woman dressed as a man, or a delicate beauty dressed as a man. However, the other party was a genuine man, and Ji Yunhuang could still see that. Ji Yunhuang's temperament was cold. Moreover, in the eyes of someone who had experienced the vicissitudes of life, this obviously provocative youth in front of him was still a child. He was too lazy to pay attention to him. He put away the flute and turned around to leave. "Wait!" The youth in the robe blocked his path. Ji Yunhuang had always disliked people getting close to him, so he took a step back. "What's the matter?" He was much taller than the other party. The youth standing in front of him was half a head shorter, so he naturally lost in terms of aura. The natural pressure emitted from Ji Yunhuang's body caused the brocade-robed youngster's heart to tremble, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. This youngster's appearance was weak, but his character was not weak at all. In fact, he was somewhat arrogant. He simply jumped onto a large rock at the side and looked down at Ji Yunhuang from above. He spoke bluntly, "I heard that you are pursuing Qing." Ji Yunhuang did not deny it. "So what if I am?" The youth in the robe raised his head and laughed. "With just you? What kind of person is Miss Qing? How can she be pursued by a nobody like you? This marquis advises you to give up on this idea. Otherwise, you won't have a good time." Ji Yunhuang lightly glanced at him. He was too lazy to say anything to him, so he turned around and walked past him. The brocade-robed youth was completely ignored by Ji Yunhuang, and he became even angrier in his heart. He raised his palm and slapped it towards Ji Yunhuang. "You dare to ignore this marquis's words?" This weak-looking youth's martial arts were not weak at all. Every time he made a move, there would be a sharp gust of wind. If Ji Yunhuang was hit by this attack, he would definitely be sent flying. Ji Yunhuang furrowed his brows slightly. He had never thought that this youth would have such a fiery temper. If he wanted to make a move, he would make a move. He was simply like a spoiled little tyrant. Although he still couldn't use his telekinesis, his combat experience and skills made it so that even 100 young marquises wouldn't be his match. He tilted his body slightly and dodged the youth's palm. Splash! The young man fell into the water, creating a huge splash. The young man knew how to swim. He quickly came out and shouted angrily, "Rebel!" It was a rebellion. You actually dared to attack me. This marquis will definitely tear you to shreds. My grandfather is the regent of the vast Sky Empire. Ji Yunhuang frowned slightly. This child was Ji Yuntian's grandson. Ji Yuntian was Ji Yunhuang's youngest brother. Chapter 24:17. Ji Yuntian was Ji Yunhuang's youngest brother. When Ji Yunhuang was in trouble, Ji Yuntian was still a baby. In the blink of an eye, his grandson had already grown up. The current emperor sitting on the dragon throne was the youngest son of the sixth prince, Ji Yunhao. This kid was not very promising and had a weak body, causing the imperial power to fall to someone else. The one who truly held the power now was Ji Yuntian, the regent. No wonder his grandson dared to be so arrogant. Although Ji Yunhuang was not interested in imperial power, it did not mean that he did not know what happened in Chongkong Empire. Furthermore, Ji Yuntian had repeatedly extended an olive branch to him recently. He went to Buddha Lotus Mountain several times to invite him to become the imperial tutor. He even had thoughts of pushing him onto the throne. Unfortunately, Ji Yunhuang was not interested in imperial power at all and turned a blind eye to the olive branch extended by the regent. At this moment, the young duke had already jumped onto the shore and aggressively blocked Ji Yunhuang's path. Then, with a shake of his hand, a 7-colored flower flag flew into the sky and exploded in the air. It was obvious that he was summoning his subordinates or helpers from outside the valley. The surrounding people who were originally watching the show kept quiet out of fear. Everyone knew that this young duke had a prominent status and was not someone the people of Chongkong Empire could afford to offend. But now, this young master had actually thrown the young duke into the water. This time, they were afraid that they would be in big trouble. Although this young master was well-dressed and handsome, he should not have any power or influence. Otherwise, he would not have become a servant here for a few days just for 1,000 taels of silver. Some people wanted to remind Ji Yunhuang to seek help from Miss Ah Ching as soon as possible because the young duke still gave her face here. But Ji Yunhuang was standing face to face with the young duke, so no one dared to say such words. There were still a few people who could not help but speak up, telling Ji Yunhuang to quickly apologize to the young duke and beg for his forgiveness so that the matter would not be blown out of proportion. There were different opinions, but these people were also doing it for the good of Ji Yunhuang. After all, they were all in the medical valley and no one wanted to blow things up, but Ji Yunhuang turned a deaf ear to them. He did not even bother to look at the young duke who was blocking his path and pushed him to the side. A gentleman does not block the way, please excuse me. The young duke staggered because of him and was furious. He once again threw a punch. This child doesn't have a good memory. Ji Yunhuang raised his sleeve and wrapped it around his wrist. Following the force of his fist, the young duke once again fell into the water with a plop. What's going on? What are you arguing about? A clear voice came from not far away. Ji Yunhuang's body stiffened slightly as he looked in the direction of the voice. His eyes narrowed slightly. Tian Xueqing and Ji Mo walked side by side. One of Tian Xueqing's arms was still in the crook of Ji Mo's arm. Her dress fluttered in the wind. Walking together with Ji Mo, who was wearing a white robe, they looked like a perfect couple. Tian Xueqing's gaze swept past Ji Yunhuang's body and landed on the young marquis who was struggling in the lake. She frowned slightly. Guan Yu, with your illness, you can't soak in water. Why did you run into the lake? As he spoke, He ran up and pulled the young Marquis back onto the shore. This time, the young Marquis had lost a lot of face. His originally pale face was now completely red, and the hand he used to point at Ji Yunhuang trembled. You. Just you wait. I will tear you to shreds. This one will wait. Ji Yunhuang lightly threw out these words and turned to leave. He had not seen her for 3 days and he was still seriously ill. But at this moment, she did not say any words of concern, nor did she have a worried expression. She only glanced at him, and that glance was as if she was looking at an ordinary patient. Chapter 24:18. They had not seen each other for 3 days, but she did not say any words of concern, nor did she look at him with worried eyes. She only glanced at him as if she was looking at an ordinary patient, and she was so close to her master, he felt as if his heart had been stabbed by a knife. His emotions were unstable, and the cold poison in his blood surged again. He must return to his room to meditate. A conversation came from behind him. Huan Yu, what's going on? Why did you have a conflict with this young Master Ji? Ah, Qing, I'm fighting for you. This toad wants to eat swan meat, and he actually wants to scheme against you. I want to teach him a lesson. You can only be my little uncle's, how can he be worthy? Huan Yu, don't mess around. Ah, Qing and I are master and disciple. This was Ji Mo's voice. What's wrong with master and disciple? As long as both sides are in love, there's no problem at all. Little uncle, you and Ah Qing are a match made in heaven. I don't want anyone to break you two apart. Ji Huan Yu was indignant. Ah Qing, you also like my little uncle, right? Don't deny it, I can see it from your eyes. Don't worry, I'll help you. I think you're the only one worthy of my little uncle. The young Marquis's tone was firm and arrogant. Ji Yunhuang's feet were tripped by something, and he staggered, but he immediately stood firm and continued walking. So GMO was the young Marquis's uncle. No wonder Ah Qing looked at him so highly. Love the house, love the crow. From start to finish, he did not hear Tian Shueqing refute Ji Huan Yu. It was obvious that she had silently agreed with Ji Huan Yu's words, although he had some suspicions about the relationship between Tian Shueqing and her master, it had not been verified. But now, it was confirmed. In this life, she had another sweetheart, and this sweetheart was her master. He no longer had any place in her heart. What should he do? Let her and GMO withdraw from the relationship. But he had searched for her for 100 years, his mind was in a daze, and his blood surged even faster. There was a sweet taste in his throat, he must immediately return to his room to cultivate. Marquis! Marquis! The sound of clothes fluttering in the wind came from all directions. 8 people flew over from 8 different directions and landed in front of Ji Huan Yu. They saluted Ji Huan Yu together. These people were the imperial bodyguards who protected Ji Huan Yu. Each of them was skilled. They usually stayed outside the medical valley and would only appear when they received a signal. When Ji Huan Yu saw them, he stomped his foot and pointed at Ji Yunhuang, who had already walked away. Take him down. This person dares to offend this Marquis. He even dared to tease Miss Ah Qing. The 8 men received the order and immediately surrounded him. GMO frowned. Huan Yu, don't mess around. This person is... Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Ji Huan Yu. Little uncle, you don't have to care. I must teach him a lesson today. Stop. Stop. The 8 guards moved as fast as lightning and rushed over together. These 8 people moved swiftly and caught up with Ji Yunhuang in the blink of an eye. They surrounded Ji Yunhuang and said, You dare to leave after offending the young duke. Ah! Imperial Uncle Ji. He's Imperial Uncle G. 2 of the 8 people blurted out and then knelt down with a plop. We pay our respects to Imperial Uncle. The other 6 people did not know what was going on, but when they saw their leader and deputy leader kneel down, they naturally knelt down as well. For a moment, they did not know which Imperial Uncle Ji Yunhuang was, Ji Huanyu. He was stunned. Chapter 24:19. At this moment, GMO finally said what he wanted to say. This is Ji Yunhuang, the second master of Buddha Lotus Mountain. Huanyu, you should call him Imperial Granduncle. Ji Huanyu. He was dumbfounded. Everyone's mouth formed an O shape. Ji Yunhuang's story had spread far and wide. 8 out of 10 people present had heard of his story. They heard that he had abandoned the throne for the crown princess and wandered around the Tian-Ci continent. They also heard that he had become an immortal and became a legend in the Tian-Ci continent when no one was optimistic about him. Now, this legendary figure had appeared in front of them. How could they not be shocked? Everyone was shocked and did not dare to speak. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. A question floated in everyone's mind. Since Ji Yunhuang's background was so big, why would he become a servant here for a mere 1,000 taels of silver? What was he doing this for? Thinking about the conversation between Ji Yunhuang and Ji Huanyu, Ji Yunhuang obviously had feelings for this Miss Ah Qing and he did not deny it. Could it be that this Miss Ah Qing looked very similar to the crown princess who died 100 years ago? Everyone looked at Ji Yunhuang and then at Tian Xueqing. Their eyes were filled with gossip. Ji Yunhuang slowly turned around and swept his eyes over the 8 people. Finally, his eyes landed on the 2 imperial guards who were kneeling first. You recognize me? These 2 imperial guards were also considered outer disciples of Buddha Lotus Mountain. According to seniority, these 2 imperial guards should call Ji Yunhuang Martial Granduncle. The 2 of them immediately said respectfully, replying to Martial Granduncle. This disciple was fortunate enough to see Martial Granduncle's immortal face at the gathering of outer disciples 5 years ago. Ji Yunhuang did not say anything. 5 years ago, he only showed his face once at the gathering and then left. He did not expect them to remember him. This was simply like a flood rushing against the Dragon King's temple. They did not recognize each other anymore. Ji Huanyu finally woke up and unwillingly came forward to pay his respects to this imperial granduncle. After paying his respects, before he stood up, he asked a very sharp question. Imperial granduncle, you said that you are interested in Miss Ah Qing because she looks like the crown princess. Ji Yunhuang was stunned, and his gaze once again fell on Tian Xueqing's face. Tian Xueqing's pretty face was pale. She pursed her lips and looked at him. Although her expression didn't change, she couldn't help but hold her breath. Her fingers were still unconsciously wrapped around Ji Mo's arm. When she met Ji Yunhuang's gaze, she quietly leaned against her master's body, as if she was seeking protection. Ji Yunhuang felt as if a sharp needle had pierced his heart. Before he could say anything, the sound of clothes fluttering in the wind could be heard again. Master! 4 figures flashed through the air and landed in front of Ji Yunhuang. They immediately knelt down and said, Master, your subordinates are late. Everyone's eyes widened. The 4 of them were quadruplets and looked very similar. 2 girls and 2 boys, wearing the same color and style of robes. All of their movements were synchronized without the slightest difference. The 4 of them knelt on the ground like 4 neat little white poplars. They were all of the same height and were extremely eye-catching. Ji Huanyu sucked in a breath of cold air, beautiful jade 4 azuras. The 4 of them looked like they were in their 20s. They were extremely beautiful, and when they stood together, they were like pearls and jade. The 4 siblings' martial arts were extremely high and they became famous very early. 50 years ago, they were already famous in Tianxi and had always appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Chapter 24-20. The four of them were highly skilled in martial arts and had made a name for themselves very early on. 50 years ago, they became famous and had always been elusive. At that time, Ji Yunhao offered a large sum of money to hire the four of them as the imperial guards. He even personally visited them but was rejected by the four of them. The four of them were carefree and unfettered. It could be said that they did not obey anyone. Who would have thought that they would actually recognize Ji Yunhuang as their master? The martial arts of the four of them could easily throw Ji Huanyu's 8 bodyguards to the ground. Master, it's our fault for not protecting you properly and causing you to be injured. Please punish us. The four of them spoke at the same time and closed their mouths at the same time. Ji Yunhuang waved his hand. I didn't allow you to follow me. I don't blame you. Get up. The four of them stood up together. What was even rarer was that the four of them were of the same height. If not for the fact that there were men and women, everyone would have thought that they were the same person's clones. The four of them surrounded Ji Yunhuang in the middle and faintly separated everyone, not allowing anyone to come forward. One of them took out a token and flashed it. Imperial decree: everyone who sees Imperial Uncle is the same as seeing Emperor himself. Who wouldn't kneel down when seeing the Emperor? The onlookers hurriedly kowtowed towards Ji Yunhuang, and the entire lakeside knelt down. Even Ji Huanyu, the young marquis, unwillingly kowtowed again. Tian Xueqing frowned slightly. According to the Medical Valley's rules, there was no distinction between nobility and lowly. Even the arrogant Ji Huanyu could only be obedient here and did not dare to cause trouble. If he did, he would be sent out by her. Just now, when she saw Ji Huanyu being aggressive towards Ji Yunhuang, she subconsciously felt disgusted. She was about to stop him when this series of events happened. She raised her head and looked at Ji Yunhuang, who was standing nearby. She faintly felt that he was a little far away from her. She pursed her lips and could not help but lean towards her master. She had always liked her master. Her master should be the person she relied on in this life. She did not like to be disturbed by others. She liked a peaceful life, but this imperial uncle was like the ocean. An unpredictable ocean that seemed to be able to swallow her whole. So she had to stay far away from him. Once she was done treating his injuries, she wanted him to quickly leave and stay away from her life. She wanted him to stop disturbing her peaceful life. The light in Ji Yunhuang's eyes dimmed slightly. The blood and qi in his chest were surging violently, and the ice soul poison in his arm was beginning to stir. Once it spread, even the gods would not be able to save him. He wanted to turn around and leave, but as soon as his foot moved, his vision turned black and his body swayed. Master! The two males of the quadruplets supported Ji Yunhuang from both sides. As soon as they helped Ji Yunhuang up, they realized that something was wrong. It was clearly the beginning of summer, but their master's body was as cold as ice. Master, you're poisoned. Who did it? The gazes of the quadruplets all shot towards Ji Huanyu. Ji Huanyu felt a chill in his heart and subconsciously took a step back. It wasn't me. He was poisoned long ago. It has nothing to do with them. Ji Yunhuang barely managed to spit out a few words. His entire body was ice cold, but the blood in his throat was surging. The poison is about to act up. Tian Xueqing had already rushed over and reached out her hand to check his pulse. Unexpectedly, Ji Yunhuang took a step back and ignored her. He only instructed the four subordinates, "Send me back to my room. I can suppress it myself." Tian Xueqing's fingers touched nothing but air. She then watched as the four men quickly supported Ji Yunhuang into his room. Chapter 24-21. She pursed her lips tightly. Her heart felt like it was wrapped in ice, but it also felt like it was burning. She couldn't tell what kind of feeling it was. She stood there for a moment and suddenly took a deep breath. She said in a low voice, "Master, I'm going to see him." Then she ran towards Ji Yunhuang's room. GMO stood there and his eyes flashed with a trace of deep thought. Ji Huanyu was still on his little uncle's side. He hurriedly pushed him. "Little uncle, you should also go take a look. Don't let your wife run away." GMO frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about? She is my disciple. I'm older than her by a whole generation. Imperial granduncle is older than her by 100 years. Didn't he still chase after her? Little uncle, if you don't hurry up, I'm afraid it will really be too late." Ji Mo's heart was in a mess, but she is still young. Ji Huanyu immediately said, "She's not young anymore. She's almost 15. In another half a month, it will be her coming-of-age ceremony, right? After that, she will be able to marry. Little uncle, she and you are a match made in heaven. You can't miss this opportunity. Someone else has taken the initiative." Imperial granduncle took a fancy to her, perhaps because her name is the same as Imperial granduncle's wife, or perhaps because her appearance is similar. Imperial granduncle took her as a substitute. Can you bear to see her being taken as a substitute? GMO took a step back and narrowed his eyes. Qing was a treasure that he had personally raised. He naturally didn't want her to suffer any grievances. Imperial Uncle Ji had suffered from the ice soul poison because of him. If he couldn't cure him in time, he was afraid that his little disciple's heart would never be able to let go. "Let me in. I'm a doctor here. I can treat him. Otherwise, he will be poisoned very quickly." Tian Shueching was blocked by the quadruplets at the door because Ji Yunhuang had ordered that no one was allowed to disturb him. Tian Shueching was anxious to know the extent of Ji Yunhuang's injuries, but these two women were like door gods, not letting her in. She could only argue with them. Piggy Wong Kai was also indignant at the side. "Hey, this is our master's territory. My master can go wherever he wants. What qualifications do you have to stop him? Don't you know that non-patients are not allowed to enter this valley?" Even young Marquis Ji was no exception. Every time he came, his subordinates would obediently wait outside the valley. So what if your master is the imperial uncle? So what if he doesn't abide by the rules of the medical valley? Let her in. The four of you can leave the valley. Ji Yunhuang's voice suddenly came from inside the house. Although his voice was weak and hoarse, his tone was firm. The four of them hesitated for a moment. "Master, your injuries are so serious. You need someone to serve you." "No need. I just need to control the poison. You can leave now. Don't make me say it again." Since he had said so, the four of them could not disobey. They could only bow and leave the valley. Piggy Wong Kai was worried and followed behind them to supervise them. Wong Kai looked cute, and all girls liked cute things. The two girls among the quadruplets couldn't help but tease it. "Your name is Wong Kai. So what?" Wong Kai raised its nose. "Your master gave you a good name. It's rare to see a little pig that is so smart and can even speak human language." Another woman sighed. "What piggy?" "I am Wendian. Divine beast Wendian." Wong Kai was angry. The four of them naturally did not care about the anger of a little pig. Chapter 24-22. Wong Kai, do you know how my master was poisoned by the ice soul poison? Wong Kai snorted. "My master was poisoned by the ice soul poison. In order to repay the debt, your master helped to cure my master, but in the end, your master was poisoned. Wang Kai's words about your master and my master did not confuse anyone, but the quadruplets were somewhat surprised. Repay the debt. Repay what debt? At that time, your master was injured by the cloud-swallowing beast and was on the verge of death. My master saved him and gave him a lot of expensive medicine, which amounted to a total of 1,000 taels of silver. Your master was extremely poor and could not afford to repay the debt, so he expressed his willingness to sell himself as a servant to repay the debt. He only worked as a servant for a few days and did not make him do any physical work. Later, when my master was poisoned and came back, your master, he cured my master of the poison, so my master magnanimously repaid him 1,000 taels of silver. The debt between the two of them was written off. Although Wang Kai's words were incoherent, the quadruplets still understood, and their faces were filled with disbelief. Selling himself for a mere 1,000 taels of silver. Was this something that the second master of Buddha Lotus Mountain would do? The quadruplets often followed Ji Yunhuang around, so they knew that he was never short of money. He could casually spend thousands of taels of silver, and even tens of thousands of taels of silver was a common occurrence. Wang Kai and Little Pig had an expression that said, "Your master got a great bargain," which made the quadruplets very unhappy. One of them smiled and casually took out a banknote from his bosom and handed it to Wang Kai's hoof. He smiled and patted Wang Kai's head. "This is 10,000 taels of silver, use it to buy some snacks. Remember to treat my master well. Also, tell your master to give my master the best medicine. Just tell us how much money you need, and we will not hesitate. As long as you don't let my master suffer any grievances. Also, if you implicate my master in any matters in the future, just tell us if you have any difficulties." Wang Kai was speechless. It looked at the banknote beside its hoof. It was indeed 10,000 taels of silver, and it could be exchanged throughout the country. While it was in a daze, the quadruplets had already disappeared. Ji Yunhuang sat there, his handsome face alternating between green, white, and red. The light around his body flickered and his forehead was drenched in cold sweat. Because he had been poisoned by the ice soul poison, the cold sweat had turned into ice the moment it came out. It was as if his forehead was covered with a layer of ice armor. Even his hair and eyebrows were covered with a layer of white frost. He was originally dressed in white, but at this moment, he looked like a lifeless snow sculpture. Tian Xueqing's fingers trembled slightly. She never thought that the cold poison in Ji Yunhuang's body would be so strong. Wang Kai clearly told her that he was fine, that he was getting better and better. She wanted to perform acupuncture on him and expel the poison from his body, just like how she treated her master. However, Ji Yunhuang only shook his head and said, "Protect me." In other words, he would be able to expel the poison himself, and Tian Xueqing would only need to protect him. The way he meditated was something Tian Xueqing had never seen before. Strands of cold air swirled around his body, seemingly condensed yet not condensed. Tian Xueqing did not dare to blindly interrupt him, so she could only stand at the door and guard him. She watched his every move and tightly held a silver needle in her hand. She was prepared to rush forward to save him if he made a single mistake. At this moment, her mind was completely blank, and she could not think of anything. Occasionally, she would raise her head and see GMO standing not far away. He was wearing a light green robe, and he looked like a big tree that she could lean on and rest. Chapter 24-23. Occasionally, she would raise her head and see GMO standing not far away. He was wearing a light green robe and looked like a big tree that she could lean on to rest. He just stood there quietly looking at her and did not disturb her. The master and disciple looked at each other. GMO smiled at her. His smile was as warm as usual, but her heart clenched for no reason. She was no longer as calm as before. Instead, she was a little confused. However, she still smiled back at her master. The master and disciple seemed to have a tacit understanding. Master! Little pig Wang Kai jumped back. Tian Xueqing shushed it, telling it not to make any noise so that it would not disturb Ji Yunhuang, who was meditating inside. Wang Kai pulled out a banknote from its chest pocket and whispered, "Master, look, a banknote worth 10,000 taels." Tian Xueqing was surprised. "Where did you get this?" Wang Kai then repeated what it had said to the quadruplets. Tian Xueqing was silent. It seemed that the Honorable Imperial Uncle Ji was willing to stay here as a servant because of her. No, it was not for her. It was for the crown princess who had the same name as her. He treated her as a substitute for the crown princess who had died young, so he treated her like a pearl and listened to her every word. He did not hesitate to lower himself and become a servant. She closed her eyes. Her heart was in a mess. She felt sour and bitter at the same time. She did not know what she was feeling. After all, she was not even 15 years old. When faced with this kind of messy relationship, she did not know what to do. GMO waved at her from afar. Tian Xueqing let little pig Wang Kai watch over her while she ran towards her master. The master and disciple were talking under a big tree. They could see Wang Kai and Ji Yunhuang's room when they raised their heads. "Xueqing, how is he?" "He is healing himself. Now, he is a little more stable." GMO sighed. "It's all because of me." Tian Xueqing did not want her master to feel burdened. "Master, you don't have to feel sorry. He did it to repay his debt." She was a little lacking in confidence as she spoke. GMO looked at her and saw her looking at Ji Yunhuang's room every few sentences. He sighed in his heart. "Xueqing, master, there is nothing between us. He's just a patient of mine. He'll leave once he recovers." Tian Xueqing sounded anxious as if she wanted to distance herself from something. GMO raised his hand and stroked her hair. "Don't worry. I know that you don't have any feelings for him, but master, he's probably treating me like this because of my name, or maybe because I look like the late crown princess. He actually doesn't like me. He'll understand soon enough." Although she was still young, she didn't want to be anyone's substitute. In order to prove something, Tian Xueqing tugged on Ji-Mo's sleeve and shook it coquettishly. "Master," Xueqing said, "that I want to stay by your side forever and be your right-hand woman." GMO lowered his eyes to look at her. His gaze was slightly complicated. He sighed softly. "You were still young at that time. What you said was childish. Xueqing, you will marry sooner or later. How can you stay by master's side forever?" "Then I'll never get married." Tian Xueqing was naturally sensitive and afraid of marriage. It was as if once she got married, she would fall into hell. GMO pressed his palm on Tian Xueqing's shoulder and muttered to himself. His gaze fell on her face again. "Xueqing, are you really willing to stay by master's side forever?" "I'm willing." Tian Xueqing answered without hesitation. Chapter 24-24. Then I have a way to fulfill your wish. What way? GMO paused for a moment, as if he found it hard to say. In the end, he made up his mind and said, "You can marry me. That way, you and I will be master and disciple, as well as husband and wife. Naturally, we can stay together for the rest of our lives." Tian Xueqing felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She opened her mouth slightly and was stunned. She was very peaceful and comfortable beside her master, so she was willing to stay by his side for the rest of her life. But to marry him, she had never thought of this before. This proposal came too suddenly, and Tian Xueqing did not know how to react. Since he had already said this, GMO decided to strike while the iron was hot. "Xueqing, don't worry. Even after we get married, we will still get along with each other. I will only treat you better, and our lives will not change too much. The life that she liked would not change. Nothing would change. This should be acceptable, right? Wasn't this what she had always hoped for? Tian Shuiqing felt that she should agree, but she could not open her mouth. Her pretty face flushed red. GMO patted her shoulder. Shuiqing, I know this is too sudden for you. You can think about it before giving me an answer. There is no need to rush. GMO turned around and left. Tian Shuiqing stood there in a daze for a moment before slowly walking back to Ji Yunhuang's room. Fortunately, Ji Yunhuang's poison was controlled in time and did not worsen. Tian Shuiqing waited at his door for 4 hours before she finally saw that he had recovered. She heaved a sigh of relief and silently used her sleeves to wipe the cold sweat from her palms. The ice on his body had already disappeared. Although his face was still pale, it was no longer blue. There was also a faint red color on his lips. He had probably suffered too much just now. His body was covered in cold sweat, which had formed a frost armor. When he controlled the poison, the frost armor melted, making him look like he had just been fished out of the water. His white robes were also drenched. He stretched his limbs and then looked at her. His gaze was too complicated, causing Tian Shuiqing's words to be stuck in her throat. She held back for a moment and finally squeezed out a sentence. How are you? Not bad. I finally got it under control. Ji Yunhuang replied. His voice was extremely hoarse, and he looked exhausted. Oh, that's good. That's good. Tian Shuiqing unconsciously replied. Ji Yunhuang looked at her without saying a word. After all, the little girl was still young. Although she tried her best to remain calm, her nervousness and helplessness were practically written all over her face. Tian Shuiqing felt her hair stand on end from being stared at by him. She had never been afraid of meeting anyone's gaze before, but now, she was afraid of Ji Yunhuang. She stood up and said, Since you're fine, I'll go back first. Your clothes are wet. Go back and change them. I'll get someone to wash them for you. She turned to leave. Do you like your master? Ji Yunhuang suddenly asked. This question was too straightforward. Tian Shuiqing paused for a moment before replying, Of course. The like I'm talking about is the like that I want to marry him. Ji Yunhuang said word by word, Is that what you like about him? His questions were getting sharper and sharper, as if he was forcing her to face them. Tian Shuiqing, she suddenly became angry and blurted out, What does it have to do with you whether I like him or not? Your Excellency is worrying too much. She turned around and left. Ji Yunhuang grabbed her hand and pulled her back. Chapter 24-25. Ji Yunhuang grabbed her hand and pulled her back. Tian Shuiqing almost fell into his embrace. She hurriedly placed her hand on his shoulder and distanced herself from him by an arm's length. Her face turned red again. Hey, what are you doing? She struggled to get up. However, Ji Yunhuang held her wrist tightly and refused to let go. His palm was burning hot, as if it wanted to burn into her heart. Shuiqing, you should know how I feel about you, so this has to do with me. I like you, the kind of like that I want to marry you. Tian Shuiqing froze again. In just a short while, 2 men had already confessed to her, but she did not feel happy at all. Instead, she was extremely flustered. She did not like marrying or marrying. She did not like it at all. She did not want anyone to disturb her peaceful life again. After all, he had not fully recovered yet, so Tian Shuiqing easily broke free from his hand. She took a few steps back and took a deep breath. She said word by word, I'm sorry, but I don't like you. I only like my master. If I want to marry, I want to marry him. You should give up on this idea as soon as possible. After she finished speaking, she did not dare to stay any longer and ran out as if she was escaping. Shueching. Ji Yunhuang called out to her and jumped down from the bed. He wanted to catch her, but she ran away so fast that he didn't even manage to catch a glimpse of her clothes. He could only watch as she left without even turning his head back. I only like my master. If I want to marry someone, I want to marry him. Ji Yunhuang's vision turned black. He staggered and fell to the ground. Her last sentence was like a demon's voice that kept ringing in his head. His blood surged and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The moon was like a hook. Tian Shueching sat on a hillside and looked at the moon in a daze. Her head was still buzzing, as if there were 1,000 bees buzzing in her head. Master! Wang Kai ran over and stopped in front of her while panting. How is he? Tian Shueching asked. He did not touch the food that was sent to him. He has been cultivating. Other than his pale face, there is nothing wrong with him. Wang Kai reported. Tian Shueching was stunned. It had already been a day and Ji Yunhuang had not eaten a single grain of rice. The food that was sent to him was not touched at all. Was he ruining his body to make her feel guilty? Her heart was suddenly filled with anger. Why should she feel guilty? She had saved his life and he owed her money. Then, he had saved her master and repaid her debt. He and she clearly did not owe each other anything. Why did she have to agree just because he wanted to treat her as someone else's substitute? They were strangers to begin with, all right. Tian Shueching was furious as she paced back and forth on the spot. Wang Cai's eyes followed her, and it was almost dizzy. It didn't understand what its master was angry about. Master, it's just that he hasn't eaten for a day. It won't be a problem, right? Moreover, he has cultivated an immortal body, so he should have already abstained from eating. It doesn't matter if he doesn't eat for a few days. What do you know? This kind of poison consumes a lot of his energy, and if he doesn't eat it, it will be even harder for him to get rid of it. Tian Shueching said angrily. Wang Kai rolled its eyes and gave her an idea. Why don't you feed him? If you feed him, maybe he'll eat it. Tian Shueching. GMO walked over from a small path and sized her up. What's wrong? Who provoked you? It's that Imperial Uncle G who doesn't eat. Master is angry because of this. That person doesn't know how to cherish himself. Master has been researching various ways to treat him, but he is angry because of this. Chapter 24-26. At the side, Wang Kai quickly spoke. Ji Mo's gaze fell on Tian Shueching's face, and after a moment of silence, he said, Shueching, young Master Ji was poisoned because he tried to save me. Since the Netherworld flower can cure this poison, I will go and pick the herbs tomorrow. Tian Shueching was shocked. That won't do. The place where the Netherworld flower grows is very dangerous, and there are Netherworld snakes guarding it. Master, the poison in your body has not been cured yet, so you can't take the risk. Moreover, the poison in young Master Ji's body is different from the previous poison. I'm afraid that the Netherworld flower alone won't be enough. It needs to be combined with other herbs and techniques. I'm almost healed. What other herbs do I need? Tell me. GMO refused to give up. Tian Shueching had no choice but to tell him the other herbs and added, I've already asked Huan Yu to send people to look for them. They should be back soon. It turned out that this girl had been preparing for a long time. GMO raised his hand and knocked on her head. I have these herbs with me. Why didn't you ask me for them? Instead, you went to a faraway place. Tian Shuiqing's eyes lit up. She remembered that her master didn't have these herbs. She didn't expect that he would have them now. As if he had guessed Tian Shuiqing's doubts, GMO sighed and said, "After I was poisoned, I've been looking for a way to cure the poison. These herbs were prepared at that time. Alright, since I have the other herbs, I'll go and pick the netherworld flower tomorrow morning." Tian Shuiqing was still worried and immediately said, "I'll go with you. After all, I've picked the netherworld flower once and know where it grows." Wang Kai also volunteered, I'll go too. It'll be faster for me to find the flower." GMO knew that his little disciple wouldn't feel at ease letting him go alone, so he agreed. As long as she could pick the netherworld flower, she would be able to cure Ji Yunhuang completely. At that time, she wouldn't owe him anything. At that time, he would leave completely, and she wouldn't have anything to do with him anymore. Thinking of this, Tian Shuiqing heaved a sigh of relief, but she also felt an inexplicable sense of melancholy. "Shuiqing, I won't let you owe anyone a favor." GMO held her hand, "I'll let you live a stable and happy life." Tian Shuiqing didn't know why, but she didn't. She opened her mouth, "Master." "Shuiqing, you don't have to be in a hurry to give me an answer. You're still young and we have plenty of time ahead of us." GMO patted her little hand. "Alright, we'll set off early tomorrow morning. Rest early tonight." Before Tian Shuiqing went to bed, she was still worried and went to Ji Yunhuang's place to take a look. He was still meditating, sitting there with his eyes lowered like a Buddha. His handsome face was still extremely pale, but his complexion was not as frightening as before. It seemed that even though he didn't eat, it didn't affect his body that much. Tian Shuiqing didn't want to go in again, so she didn't want to be entangled with him again. She hid in the shadows at the door and looked at him, then turned around and left. Ji Yunhuang meditated for an entire day and night before he managed to suppress the poison. At dusk the next day, he came out of the house. He wanted to have a good talk with Tian Shuiqing. He had been searching for her for 100 years, and he did not want to let her go so easily. Tian Shuiqing seemed to have misunderstood him. Perhaps she thought that he only treated her as a substitute, but in fact, she wasn't. She had always been Tian Shuiqing, just that she had been reborn. Of course, if Tian Shuiqing truly loved her master and was already in love with him, then he would let go and not break up the two of them. He would rather be alone for the rest of his life than break her up. He would help her achieve her goal. Chapter 24-27. With this goal in mind, he went to Tian Shuiqing's courtyard and met Fen Shui. Then, he received a piece of shocking news. Tian Shuiqing and her master, GMO, had gone to the mountain to pick the netherworld flower. They had left early in the morning and had not returned. Ji Yunhuang's mind buzzed. He knew better than anyone how difficult it was to pick the netherworld flower. He also knew how difficult it was to deal with the netherworld snake. With his martial arts, he still had to be cautious. Not to mention this pair of master and disciple whose martial arts were mediocre. Although Mo's martial arts were slightly higher, it was still limited. Moreover, he still had poison in his system, so he could only use 70% of his martial arts. If they encountered several netherworld snakes, the master and disciple's lives would be in danger. He suddenly clenched his fists. Was she in such a hurry to chase him away? She was willing to pay any price for this. He had said that he would find a way to detoxify the poison once he controlled it. No matter how angry he was, he could not ignore her. Without saying anything, he turned around and ran. The wind whistled past. Tian Shuiqing carefully walked on the narrow path beside the cliff. Behind her was Wang Kai, who was also cautious. GMO walked in front, his sleeves fluttering. Last time, Falling off the cliff had left a deep psychological shadow on her. Now that she was walking here, her heart could not help but pound. Wang Kai looked at Tian Shuiqing nervously. It was ready to jump off the cliff to save her at any time. Don't be afraid. Master is here. Ji Mo's gentle voice came from the front. He did not turn around to know that Tian Shuiqing was very nervous. Master's voice clearly had a soothing effect. Tian Shuiqing raised her head and looked at his back. She took a deep breath and calmed down a lot. Suddenly, Ji Mo's body staggered and swayed. Tian Shuiqing was shocked. Just as she was about to support him, GMO had already stabilized himself. Master, what happened? Her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Her voice could not help but tremble a little. GMO shook his head with his back facing her. I accidentally tripped. Shuiqing, don't worry. Watch your step. Tian Shuiqing wanted to run over and look at GMO's face, but the path was too narrow. It could barely fit one person, so she could only give up. After walking for a while, Wang Sai's eyes lit up. It excitedly said, Master, Master, the netherworld flower is in front of us. Their eyes lit up, and they quickened their pace as they walked forward. At the top of the mountain, at the edge of the cliff, a faint blue flower was fluttering in the wind. The place where the flower grew was extremely steep. It was at the edge of the cliff, and the wind on the cliff was very strong. It was so strong that it was almost impossible to stand. Tian Shuiqing pursed her lips and was about to walk forward. GMO stopped her. You stay here. Master will go and pick them. Tian Shuiqing grabbed GMO's sleeve and carefully looked at his face. A trace of uneasiness flashed through her eyes. Master, is the poison in your body really gone? I see that your face is still a little pale. GMO patted her head and smiled. Shuiqing, have more confidence in your master. Tian Shuiqing still wanted to say something, but GMO stroked her head and said, Master has been wandering the world for many years and has collected countless rare medicinal herbs. He has never failed before. Don't worry. That was true. Even though Master's martial arts were not as good as Ji Yunhuang's, he was still one of the world's top experts. Moreover, Ji Yunhuang's poison could not be delayed any longer. Thus, picking the netherworld flower became an urgent matter. Chapter 24-28. Tian Shuiqing let go of Ji Mo's sleeve and took a deep breath. Master, you must be careful. This flower has the protection of the hell snake and is very powerful. It is poisonous all over and can even spit out poisonous liquid and fog. She explained the characteristics of the hell snake in detail. GMO looked at her gently and knew that she was worried about him. His heart warmed as he smiled faintly. Okay, I will be careful. Although his face was pale, his movements were very nimble. His sleeves fluttered as he walked to the edge of the cliff. When he was a few feet away from the flower, he flicked his finger and a silver needle flew towards the flower. A small blue snake pounced at him at lightning speed. Tian Shuiqing's heart was in her throat as she unconsciously clenched her sleeves. Looking at the menacing hell snake, she wanted to go up and help, but the terrain was too narrow. It would be too cramped for the two of them, so she could only watch from the side. Her fingers gripped the hilt of her sword, ready to help if anything went wrong. GMO pulled out his long sword, and a sparkling green light flew towards the snake. The man and the snake fought at the edge of the cliff. The green light was like autumn waves while the blue light was like clear water. They were fiercely clashing. The mountain wind was biting cold, causing GMO's green robe to flutter. He stood at the edge of the cliff as if he would ride the wind at any moment. There were a few times when his feet were in the air, but he landed steadily every time. Tian Xueqing's heart was like a roller coaster. She was extremely nervous. She pursed her lips tightly and her face was pale. Even from this distance, Tian Xueqing could see her master's pale face and the cold sweat on his forehead. Her master had just recovered from a serious illness and should be recuperating. Now that he had come out to pick herbs, it must be very taxing on his vitality. He was probably just holding on and not collapsing. Tian Xueqing's heart was burning with anxiety. She held her sword tightly and pursed her lips tightly. She slowly inched forward. If her master was in danger, she would take the hell snake down with her even if she had to risk her life. GMO was not only good with swords, but also with poisons. He occasionally flicked poisonous smoke and powder at the snake, all of which were targeted at poisonous snakes. After a while, the hell snake's movements became slower and slower. It was obvious that it was at a disadvantage. By the time the man and the snake had exchanged 70 to 80 blows, the hell snake was probably too tired and made a mistake. It crashed into a rock and almost fainted. GMO immediately rushed forward and swung his sword, preparing to cut off its head. Seeing that the dust had settled, Tian Xueqing felt as though a huge rock had been lifted from her heart. The unforeseen event happened in that instant. The hell snake, which had appeared to be dazed from the impact, suddenly leapt up like a bolt of blue lightning towards GMO's face. It was already too late for GMO to dodge. He steeled his heart and no longer dodged. Instead, he slashed out with his sword. In the end, GMO was faster. By the time the hell snake reached him, his sword had already cut it in two. Unexpectedly, half of the hell snake's body was still alive. It opened its mouth and spat out a large mouthful of poisonous fog before falling to the ground. GMO had been sprayed by the poisonous fog, and before the remaining poison had been cleared, a new poison had arrived. The two poisons instantly merged in his body and rampaged through his meridians. GMO did not have time to detoxify himself before his vision turned black. He staggered a few steps and suddenly lost his footing. In the next moment, his entire body fell to the ground. Master! Tian Xueqing was scared out of her wits. She immediately rushed over and grabbed GMO's hand. Oh. Chapter 24-29. However, GMO was still a man, and he was still unconscious. Although she grabbed his hand, she was still pulled down by him. It was already difficult for her to stabilize herself and prevent herself from falling, let alone lift him up. Seeing that Tian Xueqing was about to be pulled down, Wonkai Piglet became anxious. Master! It pounced over and bit Tian Xueqing's trousers, trying to hold her down. Fortunately, Tian Xueqing's trousers were made of a special material, so they could not be easily torn or pulled down. Otherwise, she would be exposed. Even so, the situation was still critical. Half of Tian Xueqing's body was hanging in the air. Her hand was tightly grabbing GMO's wrist, and her face was red. GMO was hanging on the cliff with his eyes closed. He was already unconscious. Wonkai Piglet used all its strength to pull Tian Xueqing, but its strength was still not enough to move two people. Tian Xueqing's body slid down bit by bit. Wonkai's hooves left two deep marks on the ground, but it still could not stop her from sliding down. What to do? What to do? If this went on, they would all die. Master was unconscious, and Ji Yunhuang was still cultivating in the small courtyard in the valley. Wonkai could not rely on it, the only one who could save everyone was herself. Tian Xueqing was hanging upside down on the cliff, and her head was a little red. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself down. Wonkai, can you fly now? As long as Wonkai could fly, it would be able to fly with them if they fell down. Wang Kai was about to cry. It was biting her trousers and could only speak with its nose. Wang Kai was seriously injured last time. Although Master healed me, I can't fly in a short period of time. This was the second time it felt so useless. The first time was when Tian Xueqing was in danger and it was unable to protect its master. Ji Yunhuang came to save her. The second time was now. At such a critical moment, it actually dropped the ball. If its master died, it would not live anymore. It wanted to accompany its master. Master, I'm sorry. Tian Xueqing's last hope was destroyed, and her heart was filled with despair. However, it was impossible for her to give up on her master at this time. 2 people and 1 pet slid down uncontrollably. Tian Xueqing had already slid down the cliff, and only Wang Kai Piglet was still hanging on. With its last bit of strength exhausted, Wang Kai could not hold on any longer. Its legs went soft and its whole body slid out of the cliff, hanging in the air. Tian Xueqing felt like she was falling straight down like a cannonball. The wind was howling, and she could barely hear anything else. She quickly passed through the clouds and fell into the abyss. The rapid fall made her heart almost jump out of her chest, and her head felt dizzy. He was falling so fast that Tian Xueqing couldn't catch him at all. She watched as his hand slipped from her palm. Master! Tian Xueqing desperately tried to touch his hand, but she was always a little short. Ji Mo's eyes were still closed as he silently fell down. Tian Xueqing's heart was filled with grief. Her master had come here to pick herbs to make her feel at ease. Since everyone was going to die, then let's die together. Only then would she be able to live up to her master's kindness in raising her. Only then would she be able to live up to her master's kindness. Ji Yunhuang's figure seemed to flash in front of her eyes, and her heart felt like it was being pierced by needles. She never thought that last night would be a farewell. Chapter 24:30. She struggled with all her might, trying to grab the corner of her master's clothes. Clothes. Even closer. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. At this critical juncture, Tian Xueqing suddenly felt her waist tighten. A white light descended from the sky and wrapped around her waist. That white light first sank down, reducing the force of her fall. Following that, it suddenly pulled her upwards. Before she could react, her entire body flew upwards. All of this happened in a flash. When she finally reacted, she had already landed on the cliff. Her legs were numb from the impact and her vision was a little blurry. Her head was still throbbing with pain. Her legs went soft and she fell towards a rock. The expected pain did not come. She was caught off guard and fell into a cold embrace with a faint medicinal fragrance. Her eyes suddenly widened. It's him. Ji Yunhuang. He actually rushed over at this time. This person always appeared from the sky at the most crucial time. Tian Xueqing did not need to raise her head to know who this embrace belonged to. Her nose turned sour and she almost wanted to cry. She was still in a state of shock and even her body was trembling. Ji Yunhuang originally had a stomach full of anger, but when he saw her pale face, that anger could not be vented. His heart softened and the arm that was hugging her waist tightened. He gently comforted her, "Don't be afraid, everything is fine now." Tian Xueqing's body was still trembling uncontrollably. She suddenly thought of something and broke free from Ji Yunhuang's embrace. She suddenly turned her head. Master, there was no one behind her. Only Wang Kai Piglet was still lying there with a confused face. She looked around in panic but did not see a single trace of her master's clothes. Master! Her voice trembled and changed pitch. Where's my master? My master didn't he save me? Ji Yunhuang's fingers tightened. He pursed his lips and said in a hoarse voice, I only saw you. He only had time to save her. I fell down with my master. You should have seen him. I almost caught him. Tian Xueqing's heart trembled in panic. Her voice was filled with disbelief. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Ji Yunhuang. You really didn't see him. Ji Yunhuang's face was extremely pale. His clothes were almost drenched in cold sweat. He forcefully held his breath and shook his head. When he rushed over, they had just slid down. When he rushed to the edge of the cliff, he could only see Tian Xueqing's skirt. GMO was below Tian Xueqing, so he did not see him. Furthermore, the ice soul poison in Ji Yunhuang's body was still wreaking havoc. When he pulled Tian Xueqing up, he had used up almost all of his strength. Right now, he could barely stand. Tian Xueqing's heart turned cold. Although she had come up, her heart seemed to have fallen into an endless abyss. She stood there in a daze, her expression absent-minded. Master didn't save me. Ji Yunhuang said. Tian Xueqing, I am sorry. Tian Xueqing acted as if she did not hear him. She turned around and wanted to rush towards the cliff. Master, Ji Yunhuang, his heart to Xueqing, Xueqing, Xueqing. Tian Xueqing flung his hand away and took a step back. Tears were streaming down her face, and her voice was sharp. I don't need you to care about me. I want to save my master. Ji Yunhuang clenched his fists and said in a low voice, he has already fallen down. You can't save him. Calm down, let's think about it. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure. Oh.